Hey, good morning, everybody. I'd like to call to order this budget meeting of the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores and welcome everybody this morning. The second item is disclosures of pecuniary interest, and I'll ask any member if they have one of those that they would like to declare. Seeing none, of course you can do so anytime if you need to. So that moves us on to the overview, pages 5 through 36, and we'll turn it over to the... Okay, so first we'll turn it over to the CAO for opening comments. The CAO.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. It's an exciting day for all of us. I think you've received, I know you've received the package, and we appreciate all the questions we've got to date. The information that you've got has been prepared by very talented and dedicated staff, and I'd like to thank them for their efforts to prepare it, and also members of council for your ongoing support for the work that we do. We appreciate that every day, and we appreciate your diligence in preparing for today and the opportunity for us to have received many questions in advance that we've taken the opportunity to respond where we've been able to, and hopefully that gives you some additional information to make informed decisions. I would like to thank SMT for their excellent work this year again, as they work hard every year to prepare a budget. And I'd also like to acknowledge Dan, our CFO and treasurer, for his first year as preparing his first budget for us, and his excellent leadership during that process. And I would also like to acknowledge Sue for her guidance for Dan. We're anticipating a really positive day. You may see during the day staff coming in and out. I've invited all of our staff to pop in and watch at their convenience a portion of the day, the full day. It's an important day, and we want staff to feel involved. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so then we'll turn it over to the treasurer for the overview. The treasurer.
Okay, I also want to start by welcoming everyone and thanking everyone for joining us. I was appointed to the role of treasurer last December, and as David said, this is my first year going through the process, my first year leading the budget cycle and the budget process. So it's a first step. It's a learning opportunity for sure. Over the past year, I've tried to keep a pretty low profile. I've tried to keep my mouth shut, learn my surroundings, and I haven't been in front of council much, but I'm happy to speak today. I'm excited for budget day. I got a new haircut. I got a new pair of shoes for budget day. So I am excited to be here and to share our draft budget with council and the community. So I'll just quickly move into the overview. As is commonly the case, staff's goal with the draft budget is to provide best estimates at an accurate, functional, and detailed budget that for the most part maintains the status quo. Staff build the budget by going line by line through every budget item. We estimate any minor changes in costs. We recalibrate lines, we adjust descriptions if necessary, but we do all that without making significant impact to the bottom line. Due to growth in assessment values, we've been able to capture inflationary type increases in a base budget that does not call for a change in the municipal tax rate. We've also been able to include some service level enhancements into the draft budget that we will highlight throughout the process and that we'll come back to at the end of the presentation. There are also other additional budget requests that are not included in the base budget, and these would be funded out of increases to the tax rate. So we have a number of goals for the budget process and for the session today. We want to present council and the community with a reasonable budget and give council the necessary detail to make informed decisions. So I just want to touch on in the budget package, you'll see that we have included year-to-date actuals in the package. Again, I want to warn that those are unaudited, unadjusted figures. Although I'm happy to take questions on them, by no means are they're pulled directly from our system. By no means are those numbers perfect. We want to receive direction from council that informs how we're putting together the final budget. This is the first step in the process. We'll have the capital session, and it will be a long process before we have a final approved budget. So nothing today is binding, but it is certainly helpful to provide clear direction to staff on how we conclude the process. In particular, staff are requesting to receive direction that is in agreement with the concept of a final budget that contains a 3% blended tax rate increase, so that we can continue the town's strategy of facilitating growth and investing in our facilities and infrastructure. Staff are also hoping to gain direction on fees and charges so that a 2020 fees and charges bylaw can be adopted by the end of the year. So when we talk about the levy increase, we're fortunate that we have received final numbers from MPAC for the 2020 year that tell us how much assessment we have, which means that we know how much revenue a particular tax rate will generate for us. However, we do not know the county and school board levies, and with recent practice being to set the budget at a blended tax rate increase of 3%, the county and school board levies play a very large factor in determining how much is left for our municipality when we take that approach. Staff are prepared to say that under the 3% blended rate increase approach, the town should be able to afford a $750,000 increase to the contribution to the legacy reserve. But we do caution that if other additional items are approved, that full contribution may not fit within a 3% blended tax rate increase. I'll also note that there are also additional requests on the capital budget that if the direction was to have those funded through tax, that would also impact what's available to be contributed to the legacy reserve. The budget does contain a number of risks and assumptions. It's prudent budgeting to present a budget that contains minimal risk, and I believe we've done that. Staff are comfortable with the budget. It's well-rounded, it's thought out, and it's certainly attainable for staff. But there are some risks. Some large commercial properties within Saugeen Shores have appealed their assessment values, and if they're successful in reducing their assessment values, it could have a material effect on the town's taxation revenue. Other large costs, such as utilities, fuel, and materials, often see price changes that are in excess of typical inflation. We also have 2 bargaining units that are beginning negotiations whose contracts expire at the end of the year. So we have assumptions on the salaries for those employees going forward. We do face a number of budget pressures. We are fortunate to be in a community with growth, but growth drives a multitude of costs, and certainly growth comes with increased demands on staff and on our service levels, and it is difficult to maintain those service levels with zero increases or inflationary increases to our base budget lines. We do have items. We have one item in particular, a position that was approved in the 2019 budget for a fall 2019 hire date. So only 25% of that budget was captured in 2019, but the full cost of that position is included in the 2020 budget. So that's an increase that is just exacerbated from last year's direction from council. I also want to touch on insurance rates. We have built in a significant increase, but other local municipalities have received real shocks to their insurance numbers. So we're hoping to avoid a double-digit type increase that some other municipalities have seen. So I've got a few graphs and charts that are really just for broad informational purposes. I wouldn't read too much into a change from year to year of a % or two within one category or another. They're just to give a broad sense of resource allocation. So for our revenue sources, for about 50% of our operating revenue comes from taxation, with the next biggest being 35% from user fees. By far the biggest contributor to user fees is water and sewer charges. So when you look at this, don't take it to mean that recreational programming or ice rentals are driving what you're seeing in that number. For our operating expenses, salaries and benefits do form the bulk of our spending, but you can see it's a significant split a number of different ways. Contracts and materials do take a substantial portion, as do our reserve contributions that help towards capital, and that number is increasing as we commit more to our legacy reserve. Wages and benefits. So this slide is just to show labor resource allocation. You can see that the largest areas here are what you may expect. They're for our frontline workers. So policing at 27%, largely frontline officers. Infrastructure and development at 27%, largely our public works employees. And community services at 19%, largely our parks and recreation and seasonal staff. The BMA Management Consulting Study has been done each year since the year 2000. They're a consulting company that takes data from 108 municipalities throughout the province and uses data from financial information returns and other sources to do trends and comparisons among those municipalities. So we like to point out a couple of things that come from the BMA study. The relative taxes payable on a detached bungalow, Saugeen Shores scores as low in relative taxes. So one thing I often hear as I try to explain to people that we do have low taxes here, they say, well, you're only considering the tax rate per $100,000. We have higher property values than in some neighboring communities. This study looks at the relative taxes on a typical detached bungalow, so it does take that into account. We also have, according to the study, we're in the high category for incomes. So we show those two slides just to show that we are somewhat of an anomaly. Most of the other municipalities that have high income levels have high tax rates to match with that. Our assessment breakdown. Residential does form the majority of our assessment that drives our tax revenue. It is down slightly from 2019. In 2019, it was closer to 88%. Multi-residential is split out of that number, but for the non-multi portion, it is coming down slightly, and that's been slightly offset by increases in commercial and farmland. So this slide shows the increase in taxation from residential assessment growth. So this shows what I spoke to earlier, that we were able to capture inflationary costs and some additional items within a base budget because of our growth. And so you can see that in 2020, we're generating an additional $590,000 just from residential assessment growth, primarily new builds and improved properties. So I want to touch on the additional requests just so that everyone's very clear on the additional requests. We have them split into 4 sections. Section or item 9 of the agenda has items that are included in the draft budget that staff, for the most part, strongly support and were able to fit within the base budget. Agenda item 10 is staff requests not included in the draft budget. So these are staff priorities, but that were not able to be fit within the base budget. Agenda item 11 is councillor requests, not included in the draft budget. And agenda number 12 is other requests not included in the draft budget. And those mainly come from outside organizations or other boards or committees of council. So any additional requests that are not included in the draft budget would certainly put pressure on any amount that we're able to contribute to the legacy reserve, or on making the full $750,000 increase to the contribution. Fees and charges are included at the back of the package. They will not be explicitly presented, but council will have an opportunity to ask questions on those. The majority of fees were increased by 2.5% as a base increase, but there are some exceptions depending on the particularities of that service area. So that brings an end to my opening commentary on the budget and the budget process, and I'll hand it over to David to go through clerks and CAO office slides.
Just before we do, I guess I'll just ask if members of council have any questions or comments regarding the presentation. No? I would just make the comment that on the question of taxation from the BMA study, it's important to be clear and remember that not only do we have some very low tax rates, forgetting the comparisons by $100,000 of assessment, the rates themselves are low in comparison to the rest of the province. And when you look at multi-residential, the tax ratio in Bruce County is 1-to-1 for multi-residential units, and almost no other municipality in the province has a 1-to-1 tax ratio from residential to multi-residential, meaning that Bruce County has probably the lowest tax rates for multi-residential development in the province. I mean, that's speculative, I guess. I haven't actually seen that number, but I have a hard time believing it isn't the case, since most are over 1.5. It would be a 1.5-to-1 ratio at least. So the tax rates, any way you slice them, are extremely low, and this is one of the best places in the province to build multi-residential developments from a tax rate standpoint. Just a thought, Vice Deputy Mayor.
Just quick items. First of all, the 3% blended tax rate. How did that? Where did we pull that number from? Why 3%?
That's something that staff has been working on in context of council's previous appetite. It felt like a number that was, certainly we used it last year with council's approval. It feels that it's a number that will achieve the goals that the community are looking for, and didn't really get any pushback last year, so it seemed to be an appropriate rate.
Thanks for that. And the second, just quickly, the school board and county levies. Daniel, when do we usually hear back from the county and the school board?
So the county has just started its budget process last week, so it's sort of at the same stage we are really at this point. I wouldn't anticipate a resolution till early in the new year. Probably it's a difficult budget for the county this year, so. I think that staff has made some very reasonable assumptions about what that budget might look like based on the knowledge that they could possibly have at this stage. So I think council should be fairly confident looking at what we have here now to proceed at least until we have a little bit more information from the county. But it's going to be a little while yet. I don't know when we usually get the school board number.
School board should be earlier, if anything. Should have that prior to the county.
Anything else on that before we move into section 4? I don't see anything, so why don't we do that? I think the CAO has the reports here. What I think I'll do is we can just take these 4.1, 4.2 as we go, and maybe as you do them, and then I'll turn it over to council to ask any questions on them, and we'll just move through them as we go.
We do have some slides.
We'll do the slides, and then we can go through it. I see. Okay, yep. So David's going to do a slide presentation, and then we can go through each section, and you can ask any questions you have. All right, thank you. Okay, so we'll do this presentation, and then we can turn it over to council. Carry on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Our presentations this year were purposely going to be succinct. We understand that Council is looking for more time to have questions and a dialogue. So we'll be moving through our presentations very quickly. And we just ask that if you have questions, then you let us know. So the first slide here, so I'm representing Linda and I for the clerks in the CAO office. The only thing I would mention here is a shift, it's a change. We have moved the doctor recruitment portfolio to protective services, so in future you will see that showing up in that area. This is a list of achievements and goals, and this is a common slide that you'll see in all of the areas. In terms of achievements, our team continues to be recognized nationally, and we've had some significant accomplishments in 2019, and the year isn't even finished yet. In terms of challenges, there are lots of good ideas. There continues to be, and there is some limitations on what we can do. So we try and work through the good ideas we get, and I get council direction from your goals and objectives.
And on to corporate services. I personally also would like to thank my staff in all departments, because this truly is a collaborative effort to get this budget package together. It takes a lot of hands and a lot of work. So I'm pretty excited for what today will bring. So I'll quickly go over our divisions and services. I don't have any changes in our divisions and services, so it's stayed the same over past years. I have a couple of slides on our achievements for last year. When we added a position into corporate services last year, and it really allowed the HR department to blossom and really do some good strategic initiatives throughout the year with our policy development. Did a lot of recruitment. Our HR manager originally was told we didn't do a lot of recruitment, but lo and behold, it was surprising the amount of recruitment we did. Only 2 actually added positions, but a lot of changes and within our organization. And also, we filled the position. We did our RFP for our payroll system. We're still sort of in process. We'll be going live in 2020 with that, so that'll be our really big initiative for next year. It does say the long-range financial plan to council in November. Hopefully, I know there's been some change in dates, so I hope to get that to you relatively quickly. Might not make November, but it definitely will make December. And during the year, a lot of time was spent during the year for the new police station. That was a big initiative this year. So our goals for 2020 include our new payroll system, continue to update our policies, HR and finance policies, continue to update and create our long-range financial plan, and I put on my task list is I'd like to review options for multi-year budgeting. We'll talk about that next year, but that's a goal. And our challenges? Challenges are fairly static for us over the years. Aging technology increases demand on IT staff. Employment legislation is always changing, so keeping up to date with that is always good. We have 2 temporary vacancies that will be filled over the next year, so it's a challenge, but it's a good challenge. It's not bad, it's just different. And always balancing the day-to-day with our long-term goals, so making sure council gets what we need as well as our everyday things we do. So then we'll move on to, I believe it's sort of now we're into the 4.1 into the sheets.
Sure, okay, so at this point we'll just go through those, and I'll ask members of council if they have questions with regard to each of these sections. So the first one is section 4.1, tax revenue. Are there questions or comments from members on section 4.1? I'll give you a second to get there. I don't see any questions or concerns on tax revenue. Nope. Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, my question is about the line of charity rebates and vacancy rebates. I think I also sent this question in. So the vacancy rebates, I know that that is a county project. Our projected budget for 2020 shows an increase of $1,000 over last year's budget of $3,000. Are we able to know? Do we know in the town which types of properties are getting that kind of rebate, and how long they've been getting that kind of rebate?
Turn over to the treasurer.
Yes, we do have that information. We do have the list of properties that apply for that exemption each year.
Don't forget to turn your mic on there, Cheryl.
The charity rebates, what exactly is that?
The charity rebates are for nonprofits. It's in the Municipal Act. Just a rebate is available to nonprofits and charities that apply.
Yeah, it was a comment.
Yeah, I didn't say this early on, so I'll say it now. So we appreciate your questions. That we'll answer them as we can. Similar to last year, if there's questions that you're asking that we don't have the detail for, you remember last year we provided a report after the fact. We've got staff taking note of all of the questions, and we'll follow up with council for any questions that we aren't able to answer today.
Thank you for that. Any further questions about tax revenue? I don't see any, so how about we move on to 4.2, council. Questions about the council section. Vice Deputy Mayor.
Question, I know there's a $2,000 allocation for conferences, training, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's the right section we're looking at. A question to our, could I ask the clerk this question perhaps, Linda? The council allocation of $2,000 for conferences, training, et cetera. I know going to AMO alone, three of us I think went to AMO this year. A couple of great presentations to ministers, some great training, education. I fully believe in, and I think we should be doing those kinds of things to keep up to date with the latest and the greatest. So the 2,000 allocation, if anyone goes to AMO, for example, we're well over that. But the question is, with the $18,000 allocation for conferences, training, etc., are we within that this year, Linda? And in each year, over the last 4, 5, 6 years, I think that $2,000 has probably been the same for 10 years now. Are we always within that number? Do we stay within it even though we tend to overspend, a few of us?
So for currently, you're within your budget, and I foresee that you will continue to be within your 2019 budget. Looking back, council has always been within their overall council budget.
That hasn't been an issue.
No, it has not.
And that being, the reason being, of course, is there would be 2 or 3 councillors perhaps that don't obviously spend their allocation, whereas others that attend a conference like AMO, which is very expensive, we overspend a little bit. So
that is correct. Some are over, some are under, and it works itself out.
Okay, further questions or comments to the council lines? I don't see any. So why don't we then move on to election? Any questions with regard to 4.3, election? So, the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, and this is probably to Linda as well. Linda, with our electronic voting for the municipal election, have you heard or do you foresee any changes coming for the next municipal election that we might have to up our election budget?
Certainly the technology hopefully is improving, but at this point in time we have no reason to believe that the number is going to vary greatly. But certainly within that year leading up to the election, you may see an adjustment to the budget.
Anything further on the election section? Don't see anything. So why don't we move on then to corporate? Any questions on 4.4, corporate? The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, could you, Daniel, through you to Daniel, could you just for all of council and explain the OPG, the DGR funding, and 50% held in reserve, and so on and so forth? Just explain how the funding works, what the balance is at.
Yeah, so the OPG funding relates to an agreement that was made primarily with the municipality of Kincardine, but with a number of other municipalities under the same agreement. It calls for funding each year. 50% of that funding is held back, so the budget amount for 2020 of $158,570 represents roughly 50% of what the final payment from OPG is expected to be. Currently, we have we have 4 years worth of payments held in trust by OPG, or the 50% share of 4 years of payments. It is contingent upon approvals from the federal government related to the DGR. The guidance that we've recently received says that it's a possibility that they'll release the 50% that they're holding back in 2022, 2023, but until that happens, nothing is known for sure.
Thanks for that.
Okay. Further comments on the corporate service area? Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just with the transfer to legacy reserve, the last line, we were talking about a $750,000 annual contribution to the legacy reserve. Is that a total that's in there now, or is that the amount that will be transferred in 2020? The 1.569.
So the 1.569 is what's currently in the budget based on the transfer from that was approved last year. That amount has been carried forward. The additional request of an additional $750,000 would bring the total transfer to the legacy reserve to approximately $2.3 million.
So the way I shouldn't interrupt you. The way the legacy reserve works is that every year we increase that amount, and you get it every year going forward, right? It compounds. So this is the transfer that happens in 2020 based on what we've already done, the space we've built into the levy in previous years, and then this year it increases to 2.4 or 2.3, and then next year that is built into the budget. And if you increase it again, it's more, and that's how it compounds and grows so quickly. Councillor Grace.
So a follow-up question for that requested $750,000 increase. Somewhere I read that you confirmed, I think in an answer to the Vice Deputy Mayor, that $150,000 represents a 1% increase approximately in the tax levy?
In the municipal rate, yes.
In the municipal rate. So the $750,000 increase, if that was granted, would be 5%?
It would be roughly 5% to the municipal rate,
okay,
but significantly less than that to the blended tax rate when you consider the county and school board rates as well.
Thank you.
Further questions with regard to the corporate service area? Don't see any, so why don't we move then on to administration? Questions with regard to the administration service area? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, I just want to give kudos. Last year, I know we spoke a lot about the public relations, or rather the promotions department, and I had a number of questions. In particular, it was an underused bucket or cost center, and I see we've made some changes to reallocate some public relations material there. So I want to thank you for helping us make that budget more legible. Thank you.
Okay, for Councillor Schreider.
Thank you. Through you. Admin part-time wages line, $10,822. In 2018, it was almost $70,000 spent. In 19, we're at just over $36,000. What are those wages, and if that's an annual trend, should we look at either increasing that, or do we not anticipate that would be overspent in future years? Thanks.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. In prior years, we had sort of some part-time positions that weren't permanent full-time positions, so we're recorded into the part-time allocation. That part-time allocation really is just our summer student right now. All of our full complement is full-time and has been reflected in that line. So I think the last couple of years we've had some shifts and changes in staff, so we're hoping to stabilize now.
Further questions with regard to the administration service area? Seeing none, then let's move on to strategic initiatives. Questions or comments to the strategic initiatives service area? Councillor Smith.
Just trying to find the line number here, Mr. Mayor, but it refers to the communications. So there was a significant spend in both 2018, a significant spend in 2018, and then less in 2019, and budgeting to stay within the same for 2020. I'm wondering if we could just reflect on what the change was from 2018 to 2019 with regard to communications.
The manager of strategic initiatives.
Thank you, through Mr. Mayor. Thanks for the question. So in 2018, that was the first year we had corporate communication. So we had put in $20,000 as a placeholder. We also renewed the website that year and did some really significant work to get us up and going. And then in 2019, we are projecting to be right on budget. So I don't foresee an overspend for 2019. And we have done some significant work planning for 2020 and keeping us within that 20,000 mark.
Councillor Schreider?
Thank you. Through you, just a clarification. Conference and training budget of $6,500, and then corporate training $13,500. Are the differences just your training or your staff's training, and then training that you put on, or what are the differences between those two lines?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thanks for the question. So our conference training is our professional development, so my team of 3. So that's why you will see that slight increase to the 65. At the bottom line, I'm not looking for any more funding. I've just reallocated a few things to suit my team of 3. So that conference training is our professional development, separate from the OE/corporate training, which is opportunities to do training in-house, whether we are doing that, delivering that, or we're bringing in an expert, for example, a social media session.
Okay. Further questions? Councillor Smith.
Sorry, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I was wondering if you could clarify the tourism study line, which at this point I think appears underspent, but I'm sure you have some information on that as well.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for the question. It's a good one. It looks a little bit wonky on these top lines, so I would like to explain. So the tourism strategy was funded in partnership with the RTO7, Bruce Gray Simcoe. The agreement with them is that we would contribute $20,000, which we did. They actually invoice us and they hold that $20,000, and then they provide $40,000. So we did not see that revenue coming in for $40,000 because it sits with the RTO7, and that's also where our $20,000 sits.
The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Jessica. Jessica, communications, $20,000. Can you just give us a few examples of where that $20,000 is spent?
Sure. Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. So our $20,000 for communication, this is everything from our platforms on social media, doing some boosts in social media, some internal and external. So our microsite, as an example, which we use for council and senior staff, there is a cost to doing that. There's a cost for the shore report, minimal, but certainly that's the communications is where we can catch any of the costing for corporate communication.
Okay, thanks.
Anything further on strategic initiative? Councillor Smith.
Thank you. And just one final question regarding the tourism study. Could you clarify whether we have received the full deliverables or if there's anything outstanding from that study?
I have received the implementation plan and we have had a call. I will be circulating that after I have a little bit more work to do on it. And we do have just today received our final report to close off the case with the RTO7. So we're getting very close on finishing that up.
Anything further on strategic initiatives? No? Okay, so why don't we move on to information technology. Questions or comments from members of the Committee on Information Technology, the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased to see that the new position for IT managers in this budget this year included as part of the zero. I know Oscar's here today, and I don't want to embarrass him, but I wanted to say thank you to our IT Department of One, Oscar, who really goes far beyond the call of duty. No job is too large or too small. I know back in 2001, 2, 3, when there was, if you take a look at the, let me just restart here a little bit. IT staff of one, I know Owen Sound, for example, including policing, has a staff of 5 IT in their departments over there. And our IT staff of one certainly carries a heavy load. And I know Owen Sound, for example, has libraries and other things. But if you take a look at the number of workstations that we've added since 2001, 2, 3, when Oscar came on the staff, they've increased substantially. And personally, I don't know how he keeps up with things. So I just wanted to thank Oscar for his great work, and I'm really pleased to see that this new position's in the budget this year, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, very good. The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, line 5200, computer maintenance. In 19, we had 94,570 budgeted, but in 2020, we're significantly reduced down to 10,000. Is that because our equipment is new, or can you explain that to me, please?
Yeah, so I sort of looked at what expenses were getting coded into certain lines, and I wanted to, and included in that 94,000 was a lot of our software and licensing that I wanted to pull out. So you will see not an increase into the budget other than the new payroll system cost. So I've allocated it into a separate line up above into 5120. Yeah.
Further questions on IT? I was just wondering, I know the county is considering a pretty significant spend this year on a series of steps to defend against cyber crime. And I just wonder, are we taking specific steps? There's been a number of public institutions in the area in the last little while who have been targeted by scams and they've been successful, or they've been locked out of their data and been held ransom, et cetera, which I'm sure you're well aware of. Are we taking specific steps? Are we providing enough funding in here to take steps to protect ourselves against that kind of activity?
Well, you will see there is an additional request within the budget for, currently, right now we use an outside source to do 24/7 monitoring on our intrusion monitoring. So they have recommended updating to more sophisticated service. So you will see that within another request. So
the other question related to that is on insurance. Have we taken steps? I know it was a discussion we had last year during the budget as well. Have we taken steps to insure ourselves more aggressively against cybercrime? And maybe you could clarify that.
I wouldn't say more aggressively, but we definitely did insure ourselves last year for, I want to say the amount is $5 million, but I don't want to. Let me round back and double check on that. But we definitely did get cyber insurance last year.
Okay, good. If there's nothing else then on IT, then we'll move on to animal control. Questions or comments to 4.8, animal control. Don't see any questions on animal control. So why don't we move on to promotion, 4.9. Questions or comments to the promotion lines. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm wondering if you could help me understand the grant or donations in relation to the trolley. Who is this money granted to, and what is it for? Thank you.
CAO.
Yeah, I can comment on that. Thanks for the question. So this is a budget line that Council has previously supported in our contribution to maintaining the trolley and the trolley service. So we don't actually write a check to the Chamber for it, but we do the maintenance of the trolley and we do repairs to the trolley and the trolley route. So if there need signs redone or the brakes need to be done or whatever the case is, we do that service on their behalf and we bill it to this cost center. The number varies each year. This year it hasn't been huge. The year before there was some significant maintenance and repairs needed for the trolley.
Further questions with regard to the Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm looking at the contract services to the Chamber for Tourism of $171,000. If we're looking at taking over tourism, how is that going to be looked at? Will it be reallocated? Does that go through strategic initiatives, or is that something our CAO can answer?
Yeah, I can comment on that. Thanks for the question. In my head, this is just a placeholder amount. You know, we're certainly not going to be writing a check of $171,500 to the Chamber. Staff are currently working with them on a possible transition. You will remember that Council has not taken any action on making any change to tourism. So we've included the number that we've had in the budget, and as those decisions are advanced through Council and made by Council, we'll adjust money appropriately.
Councillor Rich.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. So just follow up on that. So when would you foresee us having that discussion?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would say that is soon. I've seen some preliminary discussion points from the Chamber, so we are actively pursuing that. My sense is that before we come to Council, we want to have a possible option for Council to consider as an option, and maybe multiple options. So it will be soon. Certainly the Chamber relies on funding. Their annual year is starting soon, and they'll want some resolution as we will as well. It may not be through the specific budget cycle. I do know that they have a request that they would like to come to Council with. We are working with them through it. So my advice would be approve the amount. It's not going to the Chamber, and as a placeholder, so it's fit into the budget. And as those decisions, and they will be soon, as those decisions are made by Council, we can allocate the money in the appropriate place.
So just to clarify that, though, David, are we not expecting to receive a detailed budget from the Chamber of Commerce before we approve the final budget?
Yeah, I've seen the draft. I'm not sure of the timing on when they're planning on advancing that. So Linda's shaking her head no. We don't know.
Councillor Smith.
Can I make a suggestion, and forgive my ignorance on how easy these cost center descriptions might be to change, but perhaps in exchange of the promotion CFC grant, we could simply amend that to read tourism services, and that may help some of us.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, our intent, as highlighted, is that we will rename it, and that's exactly what we were thinking, is something related to tourism.
Okay, are there further comments on promotion? I do think it's important, and it would be, I think we should advise the Chamber that we would like to receive that budget prior to the approval of the 2020 budget. We really can't allocate any grant, in my view, until we've seen how it's intended to be spent. I think that would not be responsible. So I think that the Chamber has to deliver us a budget before we finally approve these line items, but also make the point that whatever happens here going forward, we want to have a reasonable and controlled transition with the Chamber of Commerce. It's not the municipality's intent or council's intent, I don't think, to be dramatically disruptive to the Chamber of Commerce. We'd like to continue our positive relationship with them and transition this in a reasonable way. So hopefully we can get some plans to us, though it's very difficult for us to do that until we start to see some plans. So hopefully we'll see those prior to the completion of the budget, and frankly it would be I would not be able to support the grant if we did not see a budget outlining how the grant would be spent. So, is there anything further on the on that line item? No. Then we'll move on to 4.1, Saugeen Shores Medical Building. Any questions or comments with regard to that? I don't see any, so why don't we move on then to 411, the Dr. Earl Medical Building. Questions or comments to the Dr. Earl Building? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. The first line related to medical building PE rent. So I just want to confirm that this amount includes or would be subject to all pods being full and receiving rent for all pods, understanding that right now there are 2 pods empty.
That is correct. That's the budgeted amount for if everything was full in the perfect world. And then the second rent line is from our tenant in the rear of the building, community living.
Further comments about the Dr. Earl Building? Councillor Schreider.
Thank you, and through you, just with regards to parking lot snow removal, we have a budget in there in 19 and 18, nothing has been spent. Is that our own forces that do that, and is it a one-time allocation, or is it a contractor?
That over to the Director of Infrastructure and Development.
Thanks, and through you, Mr. Mayor, it is our own services that do that. It's just a payroll misadministration with the change from admin. We just haven't got that allocated over, but we're working on doing the 2019 reallocation.
Anything further on the Dr. Earl Building? I don't see anything. So the last one under this section is Doctor Recruitment. Questions or comments with regard to Doctor Recruitment, the Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Could you or David please explain to me the 147 doctor agreement expenses? What does that technically cover?
You want to take that one, David? Or Phil?
It's the agreements that are brought to council on the initiatives with the doctors. So they vary greatly, and council approves them on a one-off basis.
It reflects agreements we've already signed with doctors to incentivize them working in the town of Saugeen Shores. The CAO.
Yeah, I also believe that it includes the contribution to the physician recruitment specialist position that we pay 1/3 of that salary.
Anything further on doctor recruitment? I don't see anything, so that moves on to number 5 then, protective services. Yep, we'll take it to the Director of Protective Services.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to back up to the slides, I'll go through them very briefly and then into the details. We in the fire department, we continue with the increased call volume. A lot of them are alarm activations, and we have strategy to combat that. And we have the to answer a earlier question, we in our fees and charges by law, we do have a false alarm charge that we lay when necessary to encourage the building owners to maintain their alarm systems. So we continue to work through that, but with growth, our calls continue to grow. Our major goals is continue training of our new recruits in the fire service, and we hope to complete or recomplete a recertification for the Superior Tanker Shuttle accreditation in 2020 that benefits rural residents on their insurance. Council is aware of that in the past. Bylaw, our biggest challenge with bylaw continues to be the summer months, and we changed our strategy slightly to focus on the waterfront more at the end of last summer, and we'll continue that in 2020. If we aren't keeping up to the requests for service, we will implement or use a summer student to help the bylaw officer, and we have a little bit of room there. And fire, again, is just increased call volume. happy to answer any questions on the
Sure.
details.
All right, well, why don't we, we'll start then with the, going through the areas, and the first one is the fire department, 5.1, the deputy mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Chief, how are 17 new recruits doing? Has that made everything a little smoother with the transition?
Yeah, they're doing very, very well. They're keen. Their attendance is up, and our pay is reflective of that because they are so eager to serve their community. We're just over budget in the volunteer wages this year, but I'm not alarming council about that. We have a reserve to cover that comfortably year to year, and we're requesting a slight increase for the volunteer wages for next year so that we can target that more accurately.
Further questions about fire services? Just ask a question, Phil, about the line in here, the Bruce County EMS recovery, the $5,000 that's been there for quite a long time in recognition of tiered response for EMS. And I just wonder, at this point, recognizing the increasing pressure that Bruce County EMS is under in Saugeen Shores and the impact that may be having on Saugeen Shores Fire, I just wonder if you could make some comments about, how are we... what impact is that having on the volunteer fire service at this point? Are we noticing an increase in our activity as a result of more pressure on EMS?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you for the question. Within aging population, as well as a significant annual increase to the EMS calls, they quite often ask the volunteers to supplement service in town. They can be there sooner. The ambulance is either out of town or delayed. We stabilize the patient and do those calls. So our calls continue to increase in a medical assist call. And the $5,000 by no means covers our costs for those calls. However, it's been long established by the county to help a little bit on supplies specifically. And we're one of 4 or 5 municipalities that receive that because in the Southampton area, we don't have an ambulance stationed in the former community of Southampton. So they supplement that 5,000.
Are you tracking that increase on specific to EMS and tiered response? I think it's something that we need to monitor pretty closely as the community grows and is projected to grow. We're going to need to be able to say to Bruce County EMS at some point that, we need to reassess the agreement on tiered response or I guess the agreement fundamentally. And I just wonder at what point will we trigger that? Maybe we need to have a bit of a strategy or plan for how we're going to do that. I assume that's something you're thinking about and working on.
It is. So we track the numbers very closely, and we're just working on year end now for the fire service calls. And I don't have the number right now on growth, but it'll be much related to the county's EMS call growth. They go hand in hand, and maybe in the new year, the fire coordinator will be approaching Bruce County to have that number looked at. It's been this same 5,000 for about 15 years.
Okay, thank you. The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, Phil, Chief, the Bell Tower rental, $15,000. Is that the tower rental out at the Port Elgin Airport? Is it top of the Southampton Water Tower? Is it? And also the other question I have is, maybe I don't know who can answer this question, but the tower in the north of the river that's being planned. Could you comment on those two things for me?
I can't comment on the tower north of. I'm not sure where that plan is.
I just wonder what the status was of that.
And it doesn't have an emergency service impact. It's not used in that way. We do share the Rogers Tower with the police service, and we use it for our repeater service and some radio backup there. This revenue comes from 2 bell towers that were built at each fire station. Okay. So they're behind each fire station. You'll notice a 55-foot tower, and on it is our radio equipment, and we share it with Bell Mobility. So there's 9 cells on each of those towers.
Okay. And I guess the other tower is maybe under community services, correct? And Mr. Mayor, I know this isn't in this budget, but at some point, can we get an update on the tower that's schedule for north of the river? I'm not sure where that was at. I know it's not related to this budget, but can we talk about that sometime?
It's a federal process that's under, right? The CRTC approves it, so it's really not as Saugeen Shores won't have any specific knowledge on its approval or even what the plans are. Really, we could ask the federal government, but that's about all we can do. So nobody in this room will probably have much information. Okay, is there anything further on fire services? Yeah, Councillor Ridge.
Thanks to you, Mr. Mayor. So, Chief, I just have a quick question about recruitment. So, we recruited this year. When was the last time we had a recruitment?
11 years previous to this year.
11. Now we're going through significant growth right now and sort of some increased call volume, maybe retirements and stuff. When do you foresee the next time we'll need to kind of hire to keep up with staffing?
Somewhere between now and 11 years. Sorry, I can't be more accurate than that. We actually get asked almost daily. Somebody comes into the fire hall and asks when they can apply, when the next recruitment is. And I'll say our volunteer firefighters are absolutely amazing, and we have an incredibly dedicated, stable group of volunteers. We have stable employment in Saugeen Shores, and they don't leave us like other municipalities, even neighboring municipalities. So I can tell that we're not fully completed our training for the first round of recruitment from last year, and it won't be any time immediately.
Anything further on fire service? Don't see anything, so that moves us on to the next service area, health and safety. Questions or comments with regard to health and safety? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to confirm, so I understand that this, the wages allocated to this represent a half an FTE. However, if you could just describe the additional programmatic elements below that and whom they apply to.
Our health and safety budget is very much all employee related. So not to go line by line, but almost all of that applies to all permanent full-time and part-time staff take advantage of those benefits.
Anything else on health and safety? I don't see anything. So why don't we move on to 5.3 then, emergency preparedness. Questions or comments? I don't see any comments or questions about emergency preparedness. So 5.4 then, building services. Questions or comments? Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The permit fees of $759,720 that's proposed, is that development charges?
No, that's your building permit. When you come in, your building permit's based on the square footage of your home you want to construct, and the permit fees are based on that.
So where are development charges included in our budget?
Development charges go to the development charges account, I believe. Dan, can you help?
Dan, the treasurer.
Yeah, they go directly to the reserve.
Okay, so where is that listed on in our budget?
It wouldn't be listed in the budget. Just a moment. Yeah, it's not within the operating budget. It does go directly to the reserve.
Okay, is there somewhere that we would see how much we would be getting in per year on that?
Yeah, we do have part of the year-end package that we do does, it contains a statement of development charges activity. So that's usually presented with our year-end financial statements. I could bring a report on development charges a little bit earlier, once we've concluded the year, but early in the new year.
Thank you.
Anything further on building?
If I could just, Mr. Mayor,
Sure,
take
yeah.
a few seconds and
Yep.
congratulate the staff of the building department on the work they've done this year. It's we made some changes and we've got a youthful group there. The training line is reflective of that. They want to take more courses and better themselves and build their skills to help the builders and the building community. They have an incredible relationship with the building community, and that's reflective in the work that's getting done in our town. This is a great budget to have because we've got growth, and you can see in the previous 3 years $400,000 worth of tax growth, and then $500,000 worth of tax growth, and then $600,000 this year, and we're on track to have growth for reflective in our assessment next year as well. Council's aware we just hit $100 million worth of building, and we're on track to beat both our building permit numbers and our values by the end of this year again for a third year in a row. So I can't say enough good about the work the building department's doing, and it's reflective in several months later in the growth we see in town, both construction-wise and assessment-wise.
Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Phil, I know you've been talking about getting this automated online building inspection program. Is that what's reflected with the 13,500? That's correct. We evaluated several systems for a long time, and instead of buying a very expensive software, we're essentially leasing it every year for 13,500, and that's covered clearly by the building permits on an individual basis. And what it's going to do is save us a lot of staff time down the road. Yeah, that doesn't seem like a lot of money, and it seems like it's well spent. So good.
Anything else on building? Do we know the status right now, Phil, of the building reserve? We'll have that. We'll get that report at some point here soon. I anticipate the reserve is getting to be fairly substantial. We did a reserve transfer in. Just looking at this and these lines, 2018's actual was 360. We've put in 147. That's got 500. Anticipating another 235 in 2020. We're talking we'll be close to $750,000 in the reserve by the end of 2020 if everything works out according to the projections.
We are monitoring very closely, and we realize that is growing.
Yeah.
And it's been 4 or 5 years of good growth that's grown that reserve. So we will continue to monitor and look for changes in the future years.
It's an important reserve to maintain, and it's a good reserve to have, particularly because growth doesn't carry on forever, and building department revenues don't always run at that level. But we should have some sort of policy around it because it can't. We are probably going to grow for quite a while here based on all the projections we have, and at some point gets to be a lot of money in reserve, so we need to think about how that's going to work. So I think that's something, I'm glad you're monitoring it, and we can think about it over the course of this year maybe. If there's nothing further on building, then we'll move on to the next service area, which is bylaw enforcement. Questions or comments on bylaw enforcement? Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Phil, the first line on fines. We are budgeting for this year $7,000 revenue from fines, and 2019 was $9,000, but the actuals and the to-date amount, the actual for 2018 and the amount to date in 2019 is around half of that or less. Is that why are we projecting much larger than that?
And I guess simply we don't want to shoot too low. We want to keep that up there. We have adjusted it down 2,000 for this year, knowing that we hadn't met our actuals. We hadn't laid those fines. I believe historically when the bylaw officer went from part-time to full-time, we upped that amount significantly, and we didn't see the corresponding revenue to that. So we will review that, and I worry about setting it too low, but more what reflects actuals.
Further comments, Councillor Rich.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Phil, do you ever foresee a need for another half bylaw officer, or like is there a need to increase? And I know over the summer, especially during the busy season, we tend to get a lot more, at least I get a lot more correspondence from either permanent residents feeling as though they've been infringed upon. And I was wondering if you ever see a need for increasing enforcement.
Yeah, yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Absolutely, we see a great need for about 8 weeks, and then no need. So we were looking to, and we brought in summer students, high school students, volunteers before, just for another set of eyes with them, and they ride with Ron and cover different areas, parks, beaches, waterfront, that kind of thing. And it alleviates some of those pressures. We're not at a point where we're asking for another part-time staff person because it is just that focused 8 weeks, and we'll look to supplement that any way we can.
Further comments on bylaw enforcement? The Vice Deputy Mayor.
To the Chief again. Phil, what warrants a immediate ticket fine versus a warning, and what kinds of things are included in the fines? Like, is it parking? Is parking included? Like, for example, in a handicap parking zone? Is it a no parking area down at the waterfront where there's signs? Is it dogs on the beach? Is it what are some of the things that our bylaw enforcement is issuing fines and warnings versus actual tickets to let people know that we mean we're serious about shouldn't be doing certain things and don't do it. So.
Yeah, I can say that the bylaw officer issues far more warnings than he does fines, and 90% of the time the warning is effective in finding compliance, and everybody's happy, and that's it. An immediate fine would be levied when it impacts public safety. So they're parked somewhere, blocking a road, that kind of thing, or they've been warned once, and now's the time for a fine to be levied.
So, a person's been warned once? Is that recorded in the system?
Yes, yep. Correct.
And handicap parking, no parking in a handicap parking zone, that's immediate. Is that our bylaw enforcement officer, or is that policing?
No, that's at the discretion of both police and bylaw officer.
CAO has a comment.
I just want to build on what Phil is saying and make sure it's absolutely clear is the bylaw officer is not obligated to issue a warning. The bylaw officer can issue a fine if he feels a bylaw is being broken. So I wouldn't want to be there a false expectation that everybody gets a warning. Certainly it's good practice, keeps us out of court, it achieves what we want to do, but it's not a definite policy.
Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just going to build on that bylaw component a little bit. Like Councillor Rich, we do get correspondence from individuals in the community who have the feeling that bylaws aren't strictly enforced, and we have to reassure them that we have a full-time employee that does that, and I'm sure that he's doing the best job that he can. And I've asked this once before, would it be possible for council to get, say, a quarterly report on bylaw activity, like the fines that are given, and maybe a summary of just, maybe not individual warnings, but a number of warnings that are handed out and the number of fines that are given, just so that we can have a bit of data to sort of back up our assertions that we are enforcing the bylaws in Saugeen Shores, because it's we've all heard it, that people just get away with anything they want here because they're not strictly enforced all the time, and there's only one set of eyes, or maybe two with a part-timer in the summertime. But it would be nice to have some sort of a quarterly summary, as minimal or as much as possible, that we could sort of keep track of. Thanks. Yeah, we can certainly look at that, or at least start with a year-end report this year to illustrate what activities have been. We can't provide any details or specifics to the violations, but we can look at the volume of enforcement activities.
Okay, further comments on bylaw? I don't see any, so that's the end of Protective Services. Why don't we do Police and Police Services Board, and then we'll take a break after that. So we'll turn over to the Chief of Police.
Good morning, everyone. Basically, the overview of the service really hasn't changed that much, and you'll see it in your package there. I'll try to move through this as quickly as possible to get to the meat of the matter. Overview, again, continued our civilian staff. They're kind of our unsung heroes. They do a lot of work for us. This year we did onboard 3 part-time special constables. That's proven to be a success to help with duties that our full-time officers were doing, and we've moved those to the part-time staff, so that's given us a cost savings and also allowed our officers to be freed up to take more time to answer calls for service. Achievements in 2019, we increased our drug trafficking for sure. There's an awful lot more charges, a lot more emphasis is being placed on that, especially with the opioids that we're seeing almost daily here in Saugeen Shores. Also firearms offenses, you'll see through our social media and the news. We've had a lot of firearms seized this year, both altered firearms, overcapacity magazines, and most recently silencers in the smuggling case as well. High-risk training is ongoing, which is important because of the drug activity, to have officers equipped to enter into residences that are a lot more risky than just normal calls for service. Our kids program is working very well to get education and awareness, and of course officer wellness is always important. It's something that we're going to enhance again in 2020, and the last, of course, is K9. We've done that all through community support, and that's going very well. 2020, our goals are to increase our staff. We've had, with the increased population, our increased calls for service is about 3,000 more calls per service over the last few years, so that's very, very taxing on our frontline officers and our detectives. We're going to be completing our 3-year business plan through community engagement. We're going to do it a little different this year. We're going to put it out through social media and our website and everything else, through Survey Monkeys and that type of thing. So look forward to that. And of course, like I said before, officer wellness is very important with increased calls for service, and you see it all over the news. With PTSD, we want to take a proactive approach to that to make sure that our officers are taken care of prior to something happening instead of being reactive to it when it's already occurred. And then we're going to work with our urgent response team to actually have them on site at the new facility to help with our mental health calls for service, which are increasing. Our challenges for 2020, the biggest thing, of course, is increased population and increased calls for service. Officers dealing with fentanyl and carfentanil is always an issue. Road safety is always something that's very near and dear to my heart, of course, but I don't like to see anyone get hurt because of poor driving or distracted driving. So we did get a community grant last year for the black pickup that you see with all the cameras and everything in it, and that's working very well. And it's not just about charging people either. Our charges have increased significantly, but it's also to get the education and awareness out there for people that, what could happen. And again, officer wellness, like I said before, we're going to implement or contract with a group called Mega Health that we're actually going to have people come out and meet with our officers to be proactive about that. So give them coping mechanisms so that they will be long-serving employees and able to be at work to serve the community. That, in a nutshell, is basically where we are. I can say that our charges, we've surpassed our charges from last year at the end of September this year, so we're continually with the increased population, the increased calls for service is a lot more calls for service. So that results in charges as well. Just as a number, calls for service in 2017 were 7,304, and we're projecting this year to be about 10,350 around that mark. So it's quite an increase. That, in a nutshell, is what I have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so there's two service areas under Police and Police Services Board. The first one is 6.1, Police Services. Questions, the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Chief, for your service to our community, and thank you to all your staff. You do a fabulous job.
Thank you, appreciate it.
The special levy, 484,605, I see it's offset under expenditures, and that's a long-term debt. Just clarify for me, could you, is it $60 per year that the taxpayers will see on their tax bill starting this year, the full amount in 2020?
It's $55 that's built in as the base fee for this year.
Full amount for 2020 and onward? Okay. And Chief, just wondering, in the overtime wages, I see in October there was 34,739. There'll probably be some more overtime in November, December, obviously. But the budget for 2019 was 97, lowered to 90. Right now we're at 34,700. So is the 90,000 an accurate number?
I think it is. We've taken, I've taken a lot of steps over the last 2 years that I've been here. One of the things that I looked at was overtime. That's something that I actually have discretionary spending in, and it was basically a culture change and just a different way of doing business. There was a lot of overtime at the end of shifts and that type of thing, so we've eliminated that to have the next shift basically take it over. After you've worked a night shift for 12 hours and some things come in at 6 o'clock, you have fresh people coming in at 7 o'clock for an additional 12 hours. They can take that over. So we've done it that way. We've reduced some of our court costs. We're hoping that continues. And overtime in the Detective Bureau, we've put some strategies in place there too. The 90,000, the thing with overtime, it's a bit of a crystal ball because it just kind of takes one real serious call to kind of blow that out of proportion. But I think that's a pretty good number. I'm hoping to be under that, but I'm comfortable with that number.
It's a bit of a safety net anyways.
It is, yeah.
Thank you.
Comments on that one? Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Chief, for presenting this budget. It certainly, and I'll just comment from as the police board chair, and Councillor Matheson, or Deputy Mayor Matheson sits with us. We have a little bit closer touch to what's going on a monthly basis, and and I can say that certainly, as the chief alluded to, he's brought in some innovative and some cost-saving measures and revenue measures that weren't previously being taken care of. So we really appreciate that. One of those is highlighted here under compliance checks, which is, I thought, something that is worth bringing up. And maybe you can just talk a little bit about where that $5,000 in revenue comes from.
Sure. With compliance checks, it's something that we looked at that other services were using as well. If we stop someone for an equipment violation, say, a faulty muffler or something like that, or they don't have proof of insurance or something like that, instead of handing them a ticket, what we do is we give them a compliance check. Well, we give them a ticket, but also adjoined to that is a compliance check. So they have 72 hours to attend the police station. It's a $20 fee. We make sure that their equipment is back in order, and with that, the ticket is then taken care of. So they're not. It's more of an administrative fund, but it seems to be working very well. So it's something that we can get a little bit of revenue as well into the police service.
And just thank you for that. And to build on that, we're also, as it was alluded to earlier, we are going into bargaining with the police service shortly, and we're optimistic that we can come up with a deal that meets the needs of the municipality and of the service. In light of the fact that the amount of work that we're asking our police officers and chief and staff to do. The number of calls they're getting is, when you take that 10,350 calls, that's 28 calls a day. That's a pretty high volume, and the trend is upwards, right?
It is, yeah. It continues to go upward.
So yeah, we're asking them to do a lot with a fairly flat line budget, and so we're optimistic on both fronts that we'll be able to get a collective agreement, and that our staff will have the tools they need to do the job. With those numbers increasing, is that for the benefit of the people listening here and the people present? Is there any as the fire chief alluded to, there are a lot of, say, false alarms or non-emergency calls. Are you seeing a higher trend in those, or is this just a general increase in crime that we're seeing in our municipality?
Well, our crime severity index is actually in really good shape. The calls for service are not false alarms. We do have false alarms, but a lot of calls for service are increased. The majority of our increase in calls for service are mental health calls. And just for your benefit, a mental health call does take a lot of time. One, you have to make an assessment. Is it something that falls under the Mental Health Act or a danger to themselves or others? Then we have to take them to the hospital, and then they're assessed. Now, I've also put a program in place, and we're actually working on something in Grey and Bruce, which is going to be very interesting and hopefully come to fruition by the end of the year. But locally, what we've done is, we've worked along with the hospital staff and the doctors that, unless there's something very serious going on, that we get bumped up the line so that they can assess them right away, and then we can get them transported. Sometimes if they're going into a facility, they're going to end up in Owen Sound or another psychiatric facility close by. So again, that's where we're using special constables now. Instead of using 2 full-time constables and bringing them in on overtime, we're using special constables, or we're actually using voyageur with a special constable, depending on how violent the person is. So those calls take a lot of time. We are doing a lot of things to get our officers back on the street, and the hospital staff has been wonderful. But these things take a lot of time, and again, as I mentioned before, that's why we want to partner with the urgent care response team. They're mental health specialists through Canadian Mental Health. We have education and awareness, and we know what we're doing with mental health calls, but when you see a number of people continually, that same circle and the same people time and time again, what we want to do is work with our community partners to make sure that if there is an issue, that we can get these people the proper care so that we can hopefully reduce some calls. So it could be just something as simple as forgetting to take medication. So if we can alleviate those pressures on the police service, that's what we're doing, and of course providing a service to the most vulnerable people in our society as well.
Councillor Rich, you have something?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I think that my question was answered. I was just kind of curious about call volume. So that's a trend that you would think that in 5 years our call volume would double in this community. Our population isn't going to double. So I was just trying to get a handle on why we're seeing such a significant increase in call volume. But I think you might have answered that already.
Yeah, it's basically just population. With increased population, more people call the police for a variety of things. So.
Anything further? Councillor Schreider, and then we'll get Councillor Carr.
Sorry, thank you. And through you, just what is the 5,900 contract services, $24,000 as a new budget item? What does that include?
What we're doing there is, so when I mentioned Mega Health, what they do is they provide HR assistance for what would be more in-depth WSIB cases. So that's a pay-as-you-go. And also what they do is they provide the mental health assistance through a psychotherapist. So that's part of it. And then with IT, what we do right now, I've recognized that there is a strain on IT here through the town. What we do now is we don't contract, but we kind of pay as you go with Owen Sound. Their IT, they do our dispatching and we pay for that and everything else. So what I'd like to do, instead of just a pay-as-you-go and you're kind of down the line, is contract with them. You get X amount of hours per month. They can do it remotely as well. So that's what that is there.
Carr.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question when it comes, I know one of the other councillors had alluded to this one in some emails we had done, the vehicle leasing. I'm under the impression that we've gone away from the leasing program right now. This has all been switched over to the fleet.
Yeah, right now we're just coming out of one lease, and then we have another, I think, correct me, I'll have to check on this for sure, but I think we have another 1 or 2 leases that we need to move out of over the next year and a half. And then when we're out of that, then we'll be completely in the fleet. So what we've done, you'll see there, is we've moved the leases that we were paying for, now we're putting that into the fleet reserve.
Yeah, I've seen that. So that's what I was going to get to. I'm assuming that your fleet reserve contribution is going to be increased with that. Mm-hmm. But also, too, as you said, grants provided us 2 new vehicles that I'm aware of between the K9 as well as the other black pickup with the cameras in it. So is that something that now that's going to be coming into a fleet replacement schedule that every 2 years we're going to be replacing that? I know it was a grant up front, but is that something now that is going to be a fairly large cost to us?
Well, with the K9, what we're doing through all the fundraising and everything is we're building a reserve so that when that vehicle, a K9 vehicle doesn't just last 3 or 4 years. A K9 vehicle usually is 7, 8 years. So what we're doing is we'll continue to fundraise through that so that when a new vehicle is needed, that we'll pay for it out of there, not out of the fleet. And with the ALPR car, when that vehicle's done, if we can't get another grant, what we want to do is get another grant to replace that vehicle. If not, we can still use the technology and put it onto another vehicle. So short answer is no.
Okay, thank you.
So are those being held separately somehow from the fleet so that it does not become mixed in? And because in 7 years, maybe not be very many of us sitting here to remember that. So how will we remember it? Maybe Phil's got an answer. Phil?
Yeah, the 2 grant vehicles which the police needed and received grants are not long-term funded in the fleet forecast.
Okay, further questions? I just wonder, is there, I don't know if the chief is the best to answer this or somebody else, but is there a synopsis or an overall look at the increased operating costs that have come as a result of the new facility? Here somewhere I see some line items that I think probably were impacted, but I just wonder, is there a net picture of that we could say here's what the overall impact of that new facility and operating it is?
There are some increases. You'll see, well, one for sure is cleaning. You'll see that there's an increase in cleaning the new facility. Of course, it's a much larger facility. That increased from $17,000 to $32,069 through a contract. The good thing about to pay for electricity and hydro and all that, it is a super efficient building, which is good. So we've looked at that and we've kind of, I guess the best way to say it, you might not want to hear this, is guesstimated with other similar sized buildings, detachments, that type of thing to see where we're going to be. And I'm pretty comfortable in the numbers that we've provided for that.
Sure, be helpful if maybe you may not have the number right now, but if you could report it, just what the overall net impact is across the lines of that particular piece, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, no worries.
And of course, the other thing to note, just a general comment, I guess, is, it's the town of Saugeen Shores is funding its police services extremely well. Right, I think it's not really a hold the line budget. It's a $4.5 million budget because the taxpayer is also paying the additional $484,000 that is represented here as revenue, but the revenue is just coming from the taxpayer, right? So it's a pretty significant spend annually from the taxpayer for the police service. Is it money well spent? Yes. But important to recognize that we are investing heavily in the police service and on an increasing rate. We've increased that spend a lot over the last few years, recognizing that we need to provide adequate and effective policing, and we needed to make some changes to facilities and other things in order to do that. And so I think the councillor mentioned collective bargaining. That's an important thing to remember too. The taxpayers spending good money and a lot of it on policing. And we're happy to do that going forward. So, the That's the end of police services, and 6.2 is the police services board. Any questions or comments with regard to the board's budget? I don't see any. So that's the end of police services, and why don't we take a break? We'll break for 15 minutes and come back at 10 to the hour. Let's call the meeting back to order, and we're on to item 7, infrastructure and development, and we'll turn it over to the Director of Infrastructure and Development.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. It's been a busy year in 2019, and we're looking forward to the same for 2020. This is the group that makes up my magnificent team, and it's quite a diverse portfolio of many different skills and abilities. Through our annual contracts, consultants, contractors, and our internal staff, we've completed an impressive amount of work this year. We're catching up on our knowledge and databases for assets and their condition. We're updating the priority of different assets and combining this with the condition ratings. This will help us make our decisions moving forward. Development continues to be strong, with mainly single-family units being constructed, but townhouses, apartments, and commercial developments are also being applied for. We are working to implement policies and to help the development community, as we've heard this is a priority from Council. With all the work that our consultants have done in 2019, we're closing off the year, putting it all together, making sure that they talk to each other properly and that the recommendations make sense for Saugeen Shores. The master plans that we've been working on give us tools on how to address residents' concerns while recommending projects to accommodate the growth. These recommendations will be brought forward in the 2021 capital budgets as well as in the operating budget for that year. We want to be able to know where we're going, when we need to do the work, and how we should accomplish it. We are seeing more severe weather, more ice, faster melts, and more intense rains this year than we have in the past. This changes the way that we operate. It changes the materials that we use and the manner in which we use them. It also plays into the design of our projects and the requirements we put on development applications. We look to Council for guidance in matters such as affordable housing and how to implement high-density housing. Before I turn it over to talk about the specific level or areas, I'll talk about the two service area increases that we proposed, and Phil will explain one about fleet. So the first one in your package is about winter salt. Salt is a contract that we share with Kincardine and the county, and the volume that we've been purchasing has increased, as well as the cost per kilogram has gone up. So we're looking at a service increase to maintain the salt that we use for winter control. And the second one is the landfill expansion planning. So we have a certificate from the ministry, and as we approach the need to expand, we need to start working on a new master plan for expansion for that. So this will take recommendations out of the waste management plan that's being worked on now and implement that into the report that needs to go to the ministry for the expansion. And we want to be well ahead of when that expansion is needed, which we expect to be about 15 years.
The last increase to service level request is reoccurring from last year, and it's a $50,000 transfer from operating to the fleet reserve. Council approved a 4-year increase in principal last year, and this is step 2 or phase 2 of a 4-year phase-in.
Okay, thank you both. So we will start going through the service areas then. The first one is engineering. Questions or comments with regard to the engineering service area? Don't see any. So we'll move on then to development services. Questions or comments with regard to development services? I don't see any there. So, Public Works Administration, questions or comments? Vice Deputy Mayor.
I'm sorry, can I go back one page?
Again, yep.
The Development Services Source Protection 0, 2019 was 12,083. What's the explanation for that 0?
Thank you. And we used to get a grant to pay for source protection from the province, but it is no longer there.
So to be clear then, we're fully funding that cost now internally in the budget?
That's correct. We have $4,000 for source protection that we pay out of taxation.
Okay. So we can jump back to Public Works Administration. Any comments about Public Works Administration? I don't see any there, so why don't we move on to roads and roadside maintenance? Questions or comments? Councillor Schreider.
Thank you. Through you. In some of the admin, so vacation pay, stat holiday pay, sick pay, so they're being allocated or charged to budgets where there were no established budgets. Or is that just like a journal entry at the end of the year then that would be made, Amanda, sorry.
Through you, I may help get Dan to help with this one, but a lot of the admin stuff is to be reallocated to separate admin from the union crews, so office to union crews, but okay. We're waiting for the new payroll system to make it work out. So a lot of the budgets we had set, we just kept the same codes to make it easy for payroll.
Okay, thank you. And then maybe just one more comment, thank you. And it's a trend, I think, throughout a lot of the departments is that our professional development, our training, those budgets are underspent and a lot of the time, and I do know that we're only in November and that there would be outstanding invoices, but I think it would be important for me, I would love to see us spend all of those monies that are budgeted for professional development across the board, union, management, admin, whichever. So I think for future years it would be great to see all of those budgets spent, and if not, then we look at and have the conversation, if historically they have not been spent, then do we need them? Which I am fully in support of training dollars, but we need to spend them.
Any comments to that?
Sure, and I'll just, for roads admin, we actually have a $10,000 bill coming for the end of this month for our locator course.
There you go. Any other questions on it with regard to roads and roadside maintenance? I don't see any, so 7.5, winter control. Questions or comments? Don't see any there, so why don't we move on to 7.6, traffic control. Questions or comments? The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Amanda. So we will be getting a new advanced screen at Circle K in the south end of town?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the Transportation Master Plan has shown that as a warrant that's needed for 2022. So we're working through putting something into the MTO for funding. What we have in the capital budget is the design portion to be paid this year to get that detailed design work for that left turn lane. So I would say yes, if you agree at capital budget time to that project.
So it's 2 years out before the light will be functioning?
My grant application is for fall of 2020, but that would only work if we get the grant. Otherwise, I didn't put in the budget for capital for the full $500,000 for that piece, but that's something that we can talk about at capital.
Further, Councillor Smith.
Sorry, just a point of clarification. I heard left turn lane. Can you, through you, Mr. Mayor, can you confirm that that is an accurate statement? You're requesting a left turn lane and not an advanced green light.
Thank you, to you, Mr. Mayor. That's correct. We're looking at a dedicated left turn lane because the warrant analysis shows an advance is needed now, but within 6 years a full lane is required. And my grant application says why spend once to move the stuff in 5 years.
Vice Deputy Mayor.
So just in that regard then, what would the cost be for an advanced green for short term until such time a left-hand turn lane would be warranted? So what is the cost for an advanced green?
Mr. Mayor, I don't know at this time, but we can bring that forward at capital.
Yeah, important to note these are capital items, so So just to remain focused on operating issues, but I think the director's heard pretty loud and clear that people are interested in that, and we'll talk about it during the capital budget, I'm sure. Anything further on this one, Councillor Mayette?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could I just step back to road maintenance again?
Yeah, sure.
On page 88, we've got for loose top maintenance, we've got $100,000 presumably for gravel and $50,000 for calcium. And our loose top roads are pretty limited. We've got a concession too. We got the River Road. We got the extension to the Doll-Side Road, and maybe a couple others that I'm not aware of. It seems like $150,000 a year is a lot of money to spend on, and some of the side roads, I guess, to spend on loose top maintenance when we haven't seen any change in strategy for as long as I've been on council to use other technologies such as they use in our neighboring municipality of Ellerslie, which is a tar and chip semi-hard. I know the numbers when I inquired about it before was that tar and chip application only lasts about half as long as a full asphalt. But is it not time that we start thinking, instead of putting $150,000 a year on gravel roads, start thinking about maybe allocating more of that towards capital improvements to make those roads less labor intensive and more sort of semi-hard top, or if not hard top?
The director?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is something, again, that we could bring forward. I'm not sure I'd be able to get a price before this capital thing, but it is something that we can work on it and report back to you as to what the cost would be. One thing we did have in the capital program is a request for paved shoulders. So I do have a cost for going to asphalt with paved shoulders for a significant amount of that. So maybe at that time we can talk about how to implement that program, and then if there's other gravel roads that would look at something different, we can do that as a report through the year.
You mean paved shoulders on roads that are already paved?
They are, yep.
Yeah, so we're not going to pave the shoulders of the gravel roads.
No, no, but I'm saying I have that cost put out for that piece,
right.
So I could take that number then work through what paving the gravel roads.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that we pave all of the gravel roads that we have, but it just seems like $150,000 a year is a fairly significant chunk of money to put in just to maintain the status quo of our gravel roads when we're not really getting ahead.
Okay, we are on traffic control. Is there any further questions on traffic control? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor, I would just like to note, I hear continuous requests for crossing guard at the corner of Joseph and Bruce. I'm just curious, this is to understand that there are no increases to crossing guard wages in this budget for operation. Is that correct?
That's correct. We aren't looking at a level of service increase at this time for additional crossing guards.
The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wondering, Amanda, the corner on Highway 21 and the grocery store in Southampton, north of the bridge. In the traffic study, was there any call for traffic lights, any kind of signaling at that corner? There's been a number of accidents. And the other thing, Mr. Mayor, before Amanda answers that question, could I ask the police chief today if we could receive a report for the number of incidents that have happened at the corner of Highway 21? I think it's is it Turner Street? I'm trying to think of the street name. But right at the intersection of the grocery store north of Southampton, the number of incidents that have happened accident-wise at that corner. Could we request that of the chief? I think
there's two things there. One thing is the police service receives frequent updates on all incidents across the municipality, and I think that they could be shared. They have been shared with council in the past and could be shared. In fact, it would be a good idea probably to share those with council just as a matter of routine as you're able. But it would be good to get a synopsis so far in 2019 or the last 5 years, and we could look at the whole municipality, including that intersection.
The last 5 years would be wonderful for that particular intersection, but all of them would be great. So back to the original question. In the traffic study, Amanda, Any call for any kind of turning signals at that corner?
The Transportation Master Plan did not come up with a need for any change to that intersection. It is identified as one of the recommendations for further investigation because of the accidents. So our Transportation Master Plan people did get the last 5 years of all incidences of accidents, and they were able to implement those or use that information as part of their recommendations and their analysis of each intersection.
Thank you for that. My understanding is with 3 there just in the last 2 months. That in the last 3 months, 3 accidents. So one of the key things you mentioned is one of the recommendations is a further study. Is that what you just said?
Yeah, through you, yes. That is one of the recommendations.
Thank you. Good.
Okay, anything else on traffic control? I don't see anything, so why don't we move on to streetlights, 7.7. Questions or comments? The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What is our conversion rate to LED in the town? Are we pretty much completely converted over?
Thank you. Through all our streetlights are LED.
Anything else? Don't see anything more on streetlights, so that moves us on to wastewater. Questions or comments on wastewater? Councillor Schreider.
Thank you. Through you, 5410 consultants. This year we spent 122,000 with a budgeted 10. Just looking for clarification on what that is.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. We have carryover studies from the year before, so we're spending the money this year, but it was allocated in the 2018 budget for the Class EA for the Southampton Wastewater Control Plant.
Further questions on wastewater? I don't see any, so that moves us on to stormwater. Questions or comments? I don't see anything on stormwater. So that moves us then on to water. Questions or comments on the water service area? Councillor Schreider.
Thank you. Through you, 4355 materials meter maintenance. The last 2 years have been significantly overspent, 83,000 and 105,000, but we're still carrying forward just under 40,000 in the budget. Is that something that's a trend, or is that something that we should be adjusting that budget?
Sure. Thank you, and through you, we have bought more meters than we had planned, so it's offset by the meter revenue in those instances. What we have been doing is for new builds, we've been allocating it to that line item instead of having its own line item, so that's where it's in a note.
Thank you.
Anything else? I was wondering about, I'm sure there's a good explanation, it struck me that the line 3110, the debt principal, the budget goes to zero there. Did we have a large project get totally paid off between this year and last year, or did that just move to a different line? It's a big drop.
I would have to defer to Dan on that one.
I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay, that's fine. Anything else? Okay, seeing nothing else on that one, then that takes us on to garbage collection. Questions or comments on garbage collection? The Deputy Mayor.
This really doesn't apply to garbage collection, but I'd just like to say the ladies that work at the landfill, our ability to get the high-speed payment working there has significantly increased the flow of people through there. It was kind of hard when they were trying to do it on dial-up, and calls would come in, and they're very, very busy. That's probably one of the biggest revenue-generating sources in the community, and I just want to say thank you for making that happen, Amanda. It's very good, and they're very appreciative out there.
Okay, further questions about garbage collection? I don't see any, so that moves us then on to landfill. Questions or comments on landfill? Yeah, Councillor Smith.
Thank you. And through you, can you help us understand the increase for waste diversion and calendars line item, which has a significant increase?
Thank you. And through you, yes, that is because of the resounding success of the film plastics. We're needing to empty it twice as often as we thought, so we're increased. We've doubled that. So first is the implementation of the 3,500 and then a doubling of that. So now we're at 7,200 for the year to be able to do that film plastic recycling.
Deputy Mayor.
Amanda, the tipping fees line, $130,000 increase in revenues, just is a result of just volume, or have our tipping fees been increased too?
Thank you. And through you, our tipping fees have proposed to be increased, but this is based on the increase in actual trips
use,
that are going.
With no increase included in that number for tipping fees for 2020.
That's correct.
But you are proposing to increase the tipping fees. Yes.
Yes, we are, but conservatively, I'm just watching the trend and forecasting tipping fee revenue as the trend and keeping it as a conservative way to budget for that.
Okay, and we'll see. I guess we'll see that increase in the fees and charges later on today. That's when we'll see what that. We'll get to talk about that piece, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and to the director. With all the construction activity that we've got going around town, and there's a lot of it, are you seeing more of those trips to the dump from constructors and things like that? And really what I'm getting at is what's sort of the ratio between residential use of our landfill site and those who don't live here using our landfill site, such as contractors and the like?
Thank you. Through you, we are seeing an increase in builder material coming through, and so that's one of the reasons why we've changed the tipping fee. So from the unsorted to the sorted, I can come back with a report on what the percentages of those two are. Most of the sorted is homeowners or renovations or smaller people. A lot of the unsorted is the building. I can do it that way, and that would be the assumption that all the unsorted is from builders.
And what I'm getting at is, everybody plays a flat rate, whether you live here or you don't live here. We don't have a resident rate and an outsider rate kind of thing. Is that right?
We are not allowed to accept waste from people that are not generated, or waste that's not generated within our boundaries. So the contractors, even if they have an Allenford or an Owen Sound address, the project site has to be within Saugeen Shores.
And how would we go about knowing where that garbage originated? I know certain people will say, "Oh, we'll go to the Terra dump because it's cheaper," or we'll, that sort of thing.
When we have their license plate and we ask what the address where the waste came from every time they come in, and so on the contractors, they actually want that address so they can bill it back to the right project as well. So when, just say Barry's comes in with a load, we ask which one it was, and he'll say the address that it was on, and then we invoice him for that with that code.
Anything else on landfill? I assume too, though, we're seeing an increase in tipping fees generated from people driving into the dump, many of whom are contractors, but many of whom are not. But we must also be seeing an increased rate from residential through collection, because we have more houses. I mean, it just follows that that's increasing as well.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot more, even just the people that are coming in on the Saturday to get rid of the spring cleanup, all those things. We're seeing a huge amount of that coming through on the day-to-day.
And are you recommending an increase to bag tags?
We have not for this budget proposed that increase.
Thank you. Anything further? Okay, so that's landfill done. Recycling. Questions or comments? Councillor Grace.
Mr. Mayor, Amanda, this is just a follow-up to talking about the the film plastic collection effort. Is there, you said that you've had a very high response and use of that. Is it pretty much the same in the Southampton to Port Elgin sites?
Thank you. I'm not sure which, if they're the same or not. I can definitely follow up.
Further comments on recycling? I don't see any. So, fleet. Questions or comments on the fleet lines? Councillor Carr.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I guess first question here, they're all kind of going to join together. For the net transfers to reserves, I guess the first question, does that $50,000 increase represent last year's agreement or this year's?
We can turn over to the Director of Protective Services.
Yeah.
I'm not. I can't find the line right offhand, but $50,000 would represent the increase to the transfer.
Yeah, from last year. So does that mean now last year we put $50,000 in, so this year that means that's going to be a $100,000 contribution?
Correct, an additional $100,000.
And then out of that, so that $685, is that all being spent on new vehicle purchases? Is that what that's intended for when it's being transferred? That's going in and coming right back out again?
That's correct.
So I guess with that, just as the last question too, so with that, from what I understand with the fleet stuff that's been going on, we were running a bit of a deficit with it and we're trying to clean that up. So at this rate, maybe a question for you, Dan, when are we going to be paying that off? Or what point are we at, or how's that?
So our forecast currently, we ran the fleet reserve at a deficit for many, many years. And this increase, if implemented fully, will see us get out of deficit within 3 years.
Okay, I guess so. Just to be clear, then, so that means that if we approve the extra $50,000 this year, that means we're going to be $100,000 this year, and then next year is going to be $150,000. Okay, thank you.
And we will look for other efficiencies as guided by our fleet plan council adopted earlier this year. So that will hopefully, at some point, once out of deficit, we can stabilize that contribution.
Okay. Further questions with regard to fleet? I don't see any. So that moves us then on to 7.15, cemetery. Questions with regard to the cemeteries? Councillor Mayette.
I know that you can purchase your plot before you need it, kind of thing. Do we put that money aside into a reserve, and is it reflected in here, or is that in sort of the capital side? If a person purchases a plot for future use, kind of thing.
That just becomes, through you, Mr. Mayor, sorry, through the cemetery plot sales. So there's two ways you can do it. You can purchase your plot and then pay for burial services when you're buried, or you can do them at the same time. They just come into revenue. There is a mandated care and maintenance program that you have to put in as part of that, and that we're not allowed to spend the principal of. It stays as an endowment fund.
I see, okay, good.
Further comments with regard to the cemeteries? Okay, I don't see any. So that moves us then on to 7.16, the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority. Questions or comments with regard to that budget? I don't see any. So that's good.
Mr. Mayor, we heard the presentation last Monday evening, and I just again wanted to congratulate the staff and board there. I think the increase, considering the fact we've lost close to $120,000 in funding from the provincial government, which was not a nice hit, to come in at the small increase that the Saugeen Valley is looking at, I think is commendable, and I hope council's appreciative of the good work the Conservation Authority do.
Yeah, I'd agree. Councillor Grace.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And I also wanted to add that I believe that last year, in 2019, there was actually a $3,825 reduction from 2018. So yes, there's an increase this year, but last year we actually had a reduction. So, thanks.
Yeah, it's important to be clear with the SVCA's levy that we benefit by our relative assessment growth compared to all other municipalities in the watershed. And so, because in the 2016 reassessment, agricultural land increased at such a rapid rate, and most other municipalities have a lot of agricultural land, our relative growth changed. So if, when things are reassessed again next year, residential sees a big increase, Saugeen Shores' increase may escalate much more rapidly than everybody else's. So it's sort of, it's not exactly reflective of the work that the SVCA is doing, the levy. That's not to say it's not good. I mean, it is, and they've done an excellent job of maintaining a really solid administration under some budget pressure. And so I think it's an excellent budget, and certainly look forward to supporting it. So with that, one more, 7.17 transit SMART. Questions or comments to the SMART service area? Vice Deputy Mayor.
Just, Mr. Mayor, I of course serve on that board as the vice chair of that committee, and it's been a rough year, and we've the fleet of 27 vehicles, I believe, for Smart Transit. It's a big fleet covering Grey Moose counties, and the fleet is aging, and so the request this year is not only a first of 5-year increase for fleet replacement, upgrades, but also for operations. They've just slowly been falling behind, with the increases have not been that substantial over the years, but this is a good size increase this year. But the service that SMART provides for those who are vulnerable in our community, it's a very important service, and something that, in my view, needs to be maintained and to the amount that they're requesting. Because if we don't fund, they're trying to find savings, but like this budget, it's not always that easy. So I'll be recommending this one for sure.
Yeah, so, and just to be clear, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but so we have this service area represented here, $130,000, but there's an additional request from SMART showing up in other requests, 12.3, that SMART is actually, that in addition to this is representing SMART's total request, which would amount to how much altogether? If we were to approve all that SMART has requested, what would the total ask from SMART be?
So the total ask, we had a revision after the budget package went out. The total ask is approximately $141,000.
And we separated that into separate sections because...
Just because of the timing, we had $130,000 in as a placeholder when we were building the budget. When we received the official number from SMART, we just made the choice not to include it as an additional item, just because of the timing of when the request was received.
Okay. Yeah, the CEO.
Yeah, and our decision to do that, as Dan has said, was based on timing, where we're at in the budget process. It doesn't reflect at all any staff's perspective that we shouldn't fund it or anything at all like that. It was just clearly a timing change.
We're talking $10,000 more than what's projected here. I wouldn't be. If we were looking to save $10,000, it wouldn't be on SMART that I'd be looking to do it. I don't know. So the total number would be 141. Is that right, Dan?
That's correct.
So maybe since we're on SMART here and we have that number, I don't know. Are there objections or concerns at this stage about holding this number at the total 141 SMART request? I know I'm sort of mixing it up a bit because that's discussing one of these later items, but it kind of makes sense. Councillor Grace?
I'm certainly not objecting. I figured out 146.22.52 as a precise amount. Is that correct? Well, I know.
Based on the number that I have from the manager of SMART, the total request is $140,622.52.
So I think I'd like us to give some direction at this moment to the administration to include that number at the $140,000 and change. I do. It's moved by the Vice Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Grace. Councillor Grace, bless you. And if there's no further discussion, I'll ask all in favor of that. That's carried. Okay, so that brings us then to the end of infrastructure and development. Thank you, Amanda. And takes us into community services, and we'll turn it over to the Director of Community Services.
Great, thank you very much. I'd like to thank staff. I think some of them are behind me right now. I'm not 100% sure, but they've been a tremendous asset in the development of this budget, not only the development of the budget, but obviously all year long. It's refreshing as the number of years that we go through this process that I become more and more reliant on them because they're starting to understand these budgets more than me. So if you ask me a question today, I may have to turn my head and get confirmation on something. But as I said, they've been a tremendous asset in the development of this budget. I'm not going to go over the divisions and services. As you know, community services has a wide array of responsibilities that fall within our daily activities, and certainly they're unique in some cases, and in some cases certainly part of the day-to-day tasks. We've had a number of achievements in 2019, and some of them were still occurring as we wind down the year. Michael has assured me that we've got the largest number of swimming participants ever at Centennial Pool, and as he solidifies those numbers, we'll be sure to share those exact numbers with you. We had a successful installation of the Coliseum floor and the dehumidification units, and as you've all had the opportunity to tour that facility, you've seen how it reflects almost like a new facility inside, and we've got a lot of positive feedback from that project. It took a tremendous amount of time by our manager of projects, and it's evident because you can be proud of that facility once again. The roof projects, snow came a little bit sooner than what we anticipated, and at time of printing this report, they were in line to be done about 4 weeks ago. That and the key fob will be happening, at least the key fob, the first week of December. The roof projects, we are dealing with the contractors right now. We are replacing 6 roofs this year, which is a large number, but obviously needed it done, and that was through the support of capital budget last year through this council. We've provided some enhancements to the municipal office that improve efficiency and ergonomics for our employees, and hopefully you've had an opportunity to go through the office and see some of those changes that we've implemented. I've been in front of you, I feel, a tremendous amount this year talking about the YMCA and moving forward in the next steps, and the grant application is now complete, so those are some good news stories as well. I came forward and presented to you a parks bylaw, something we've never really had before in Saugeen Shores, and I've committed to coming back in a year to update you on the process as we have lived it over the last year. And we've had the completion of the promenade and the lighting improvements down at the Port Elgin Main Beach. We've received positive comments on that. It's brought new vitality to the beach. The lights have been a tremendous asset and has extended the experience that our users have not only during the day but into the evening walking the trail system down there. 2020, we have a number of goals, and they're identified there, but the continued bike-friendly successes that we've been working with through our Manager of Recreation, Lisa Billing. We are eagerly anticipating the final results of the Transportation Master Plan that will assist us with deciding on the next steps and what makes sense as far as continuing on with the bike-friendly. You'll see when we present capital that there's some capital improvements that reflect on bike-friendly as well. And we're excited to say that the Great Lakes Waterfront Trail Association has earmarked Saugeen Shores as a destination this summer, and you'll see a number of cyclists staying in our community for an evening. The other thing as far as bike-friendly, we're looked upon as leaders in Saugeen Shores for small-town Ontario, and Lisa's had an opportunity to travel the province and share our stories with other communities. We continuation of initiating recommendations within the Recreation Master Plan and the Waterfront Master Plan, and you'll start to see those as part of our capital presentation. In 2020, we'll look forward to meeting back with you again with the completion of an agreement with the Own Sound Family YMCA. We've started the solid and supporting the ad hoc with the solid planning process for the Lamont Sports Park. We'll be looking forward to those results too, presenting them to Council. We certainly want to continue the investigation for a 12-month ice at the community complex. We continue to have positive comments and requests for that consideration, so we'll be working with Council through that. And continued process of finding efficiencies in our day-to-day operations, something we do on a regular basis, where we do an analysis of what we do, why we do, and how we do it. My challenges don't necessarily change much from year to year, but I'm confident in saying that as we do have challenges, we also are taking steps on reducing those challenges and working with those. So managing aging infrastructure in our parks, docks, and Centennial Pool. And again, as we present to Council, you've been most supportive in our capital requests and reducing that component. Are continuing to balance the waterfront maintenance expectations and ecological concerns. And again, through this Council, you've supported us through a stewardship position for the waterfront, and we're starting to see some great results with that program. Our ice pads, ball diamonds, soccer fields, and pool, they're all still really feeling the pressures of lots of usage, over-usage in some capacities, something our neighbors can't necessarily say the same. So one of the things that we're starting at looking at is user policies that dictate who uses the facilities and when, and what makes sense for youth versus adults. Again, we do have a considerable reliance on summer students to support operations with minimal supervision. It is the most economical way of providing the service that we do by utilizing the large number of summer students that we do. And through our full-time staff, we attempt to have crews that supervise those students in a safe manner. We're managing growth and expectations within our budget. And I say we're the doer of everything. We have a vast array of expertise on our team that we utilize on a daily basis in order to accomplish what we need to do. And certainly within the last year, the rising water levels have, I don't want to say play havoc with our operations, but certainly have produced some additional work that we wouldn't necessarily have expected. So working closely with infrastructure and development, we continue to monitor our trails and our roadways. We are quite fortunate in Saugeen Shores that we're not experiencing some of the impacts that the likes of Meaford has received. You would have seen that in the mail. Port Hope, all of those communities. So we have been relatively happy. Trails you can rebuild. So we're in a relatively good position.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll start going through the service areas, and the first one is Community Service Administration 8.1. Questions or comments? I don't see any. Oh, Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What's the complement in your community service area?
For full-time
Staff, yeah.
For full-time staff, we have 6 full-time staff.
Okay, and then you go up to 40 or 50 or 60, or what was it for summer students?
So just to clarify, that's for our administration staff with you in the office?
That is there. Yeah,
right.
That section, yeah,
right.
is right.
So our summer staff are shown in Parks budget.
Okay.
Okay, further comments on Community Services Administration? I don't see any, so that moves us on to 8.2, Town Facilities. Questions or comments? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Can you help explain the fluctuation in lease payments associated with the Chamber office?
Yes, certainly. I can. In 2019, it was budgeted incorrectly to reflect the grant agreements, the agreements that we have with them. 2020, we're feeling more confident that that's in line with their payments.
Further comments on town facilities? I don't see any. So that moves us then on to library, 8.3, questions or comments?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The wages, what would that cover?
Typically, the wages historically have covered part-time staff that do cleaning services at the libraries. So those cover those, and then it would also cover any wages that our staff need to do to go in and do maintenance purposes in those facilities.
Further questions on the libraries? I don't see any, so that moves us on to 8.4, airport. Questions or comments?
If I may make comment on this one, this particular budget does have a service request sheet that accompanies it. There has been a request by the airport committee for an increase in their grant that they receive from the community, from the municipality. Last year it was $22,360, and this year they're asking for $24,185. And I don't want to take their spotlight away from them, but I understand they are presenting their budget at the December meeting.
Okay, that'll be helpful. Anything on the airport at this point? The chance to ask them more questions later on. So the next one then is 8.5, recreation and culture. Questions or comments? I don't see any questions or comments on recreation and culture, so why don't we head... Oh, do you have one? The Deputy Mayor.
I see on line 4920, we had $7,000 allocated for our bike-friendly initiative and $7,500 for next year. Can you tell me what we have that designated for?
I would be taking a guess, so if you don't mind, I'll get back to you on that comment.
Anything else on recreation and culture? I don't see anything, so let's go to parks. Questions or comments? 8.6. Councillor Schreider?
Thank you. Through you, I know that I think the Saugeen Rail Trail is in the same position as the airport, that they have requested a small increase to their budget as well. I think the variance sheet is in here. I think the variance sheet indicates that they wanted additional money for the plowing of the new paved trail. In conversations with them, actually their costs of trail maintenance and whatnot is going up as well. So they would like the increase to $20,000, but not earmarked for anything in particular. Materials and trail maintenance, they're seeing a rise in cost as well. So I just wanted to point that out, and I think that they are coming to budget in the next little while, or coming to council in the next little while as well. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's one we'll be looking at again later on today in the additional requests, so we can discuss it then. Anything else on parks? Councillor Rich.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. So just to kind of understand staffing for cutting ball diamonds and parks grass maintenance. So we hire summer students that mostly do that work, and then we hire managers to manage those students. Is that correct, or how does that work?
No. To clarify, we've got a number of, we term them crews, anything from garbage crew to waterfront to downtown to parks, grass cutting, active, passive. And our manager of parks, coordinates the scheduling for all of that staff. Then what the daily overseeing of those crews is done by our union staff. And they don't necessarily develop the schedule, they're just providing some oversight to what they're doing each day, if that makes sense.
If I could follow up on that. So if we, that summer students staffing, they have set hours. So for example, if it rains or something like that, they may not be able to accomplish the maintenance on the parks or on the ball diamonds at that time. They'd have to push that in, or do they stay late and we pay them overtime?
It depends what they're doing. In most cases, we can find additional work for them because we do have a tremendous amount that doesn't necessarily need to be outside. Sorry, your first question, you asked me two questions there?
I was just looking at, so I'll tell you where I'm going. So I'm looking at hours, and I know it's hard to keep up it's hard to keep up on grass maintenance and things. And I know that so I used to live in Calgary, and in Calgary they privatized all that. So they have all the grass cutting is taken care of by outside contractors. So when I look at, for summer students, right, it's not like we pay them a premium. I think we're paying them about minimum wage. And so I'm curious if it'd be better for the municipality over the long haul if we did a little study or had a look at whether or not contracting the portion that summer students would do to outside contractors for grass cutting.
Yeah, if I can share a bit of information that I am used to doing with contract versus employees, I can tell you I'm going back many, many years ago. I'm dating myself, so I won't tell you the year. We did attempt one summer. We did contract out. I think we even brought in a different department to do the skill of grass cutting on our active parks. And it's not like cutting your grass at home. There is a specific skill. There's specific training that our staff go through in order to provide that service. We did it for one summer, and it was turned back to community services after that summer. Again, because of the level of service that the users were previously accustomed to that they were no longer getting when we went out to a contract service. There certainly are some benefits to going out to contract in some cases. But again, when we look at things like cleaning our washrooms or garbage collection, when we have issues that require immediate attention, we have staff that are available that can go out and provide that service as opposed to waiting for a contractor to come back and provide that service.
And for certain, I wasn't talking about contracting out garbage pickup, but I'll be perfectly honest, I have heard some comments from different baseball diamond users that have complained personally to me about the level of service that they've seen sometimes on the ball diamonds. And so I was trying to kind of figure out how we got there and whether or not it's because we don't have the staff, or if there would be a better option where someone was held accountable to a level of service for those facilities. And I was just wondering if we'd ever really looked at it. So we'd run a trial of 1 year, however many years ago. I was wondering if you'd ever consider doing that again.
Yeah, certainly. And if I may add to that, part of the process of going through the Lamont Sports Park and working with a consultant right now, brings a considerable amount of valuable experience to our table. And one of the things we've asked him to provide us is a bit of some information on how we can improve the way we provide our level of service for grass cutting and maintenance of our soccer pitches or our baseball diamonds. We're going to reach out to them again and ask if they can do that for our soccer pitches, and then come back and do a training exercise with our staff.
Move to the Deputy Mayor and then the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, just as an aside to that, part of the report that we're going to be getting in on the Lamont Sports Park will be the conditions of our facilities, our ball diamonds and stuff, and they're going to be giving us instructions on how to better improve and prepare them.
Vice Deputy Mayor.
Jane, the Port Elgin splash pad, you've decreased maintenance from 10,000 to 5,000. Where have you found most of those savings?
We're not having to pay for sanitary for the removal of the water because we're using it ourselves, so there was a savings there. And to be quite frank, this is our second, going into our third year of the splash pad, so it's been a bit of a trial and error from the get-go. Obviously, when we initially budgeted for the usage of the splash pads, we wanted to ensure that we were covering our expenses, and through the last couple of years, we have a better idea of what it actually costs for it. So again, we've been used as examples in other communities because of the opportunity of recycling that water, and it definitely helps us when we're in drought seasons.
Certainly demonstrates the work that the administration did when we were going through that process of planning well for that, predicting what those costs would be, and in fact being quite conservative in those estimates. And it turned out to be a much more effective operation than even we projected, which I would have guessed even at the time. But that's good. Councillor Schreider.
Thank you, through you. Jane, tree maintenance, 4771 line. I know that was one that we had talked about before as well, and we had only spent about $6,000 last year out of 18, and now we're going to 20. Do you see us working a little bit closer with Saugeen or Trees for Saugeen and developing that program, or is this a separate maintenance line?
It's both, actually. Some of it is ours, and I can tell you the year-to-date is far more higher than that amount. I think we've spent most of it at this point.
Awesome.
We'll continue. We haven't been actively working with Saugeen for some time, but certainly our doors are always open. It's a great partnership. They've had some great results in the past, as have we, so certainly anything that we do with Saugeen would come out of that budget line as well.
Perfect. I know they're looking forward to working with the town again, too.
Yeah, Vice Deputy Mayor.
Sorry, the wildlife management. What's included in the 10,000 for wildlife management? Is that to do with the waterfront?
That's a few things, not necessarily the waterfront, but mind you, we'll continue to do some planting along the waterfront that assists with geese mitigation. But it also is when we get calls for nuisance animals that we need to remove, anything like that, that we use within that amount of money.
I just had a question, Jan. I was wondering about the line 9300 and the transfer from reserve that we've been using for the last couple of years that we're no longer using. And I just wonder what were we doing that we're not doing now on that front?
So that transfer was coming from the Parks Reserve. Due to the current balance of the Parks Reserve, it was just felt that it wasn't a necessary transfer and just not the available balance in that reserve to continue with that transfer. It ultimately, Parks is a tax-funded department. The reserve is tax-funded through the transfers from the Parks Department. So just a decision that we made from a financial standpoint on the proper treatment of that line.
And that really accounts for most of the increase to parks this year is that reduction. So I say that, so it looks to me like a lot of what the additional spending is offsetting our use of reserves in this cost center.
Yeah, that's correct.
Good. Anything else? No, then that moves us on to 8.7, the harbor. Any questions or comments? The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to Jane. With our rising water level and the storms that we've been having, we've noticed quite a bit of destruction to the promenade in front of the new beach house and along the shoreline at the harbor in Port Elgin. Will you be looking at giving us some estimates of what it's going to require to repair those along the way, or are we going to need some other type of rock supplement to keep the waves from crashing into that point to keep it from washing out?
It depends what you're talking about. If you're talking about waterfront or the harbor. Waterfront, we can certainly bring forward a report, the impact of the high water levels that have had. So far we've had to somewhat manage it. We've worked closely with infrastructure development and the repair work that has occurred along the North Shore Road and the impact to the North Shore Trail system. To be honest, you can't fool with Mother Nature. It's really a waiting game right now until we see where this finally ends. What we're hearing is that water levels are not going down, that they're going to continue to increase. So there isn't a tremendous amount that we can do. We have done a little bit of mitigation along the Port Elgin Main Beach in the area of the lookout areas. We know that the lookout areas along North Shore Road have had some damage to them. It's armor stone that can be repaired, but really there's minimal we can do right now until I want to say when this subsides, and I really don't know. No one knows when this will end.
Just looking at a few of the pictures that I've seen of the lookouts and how they're being undercut and eaten, is there anything we should be doing to kind of minimize that damage, or is it just wait and see?
Really wait and see. And in some areas along the North Shore Road, we have actually closed off a portion of the trail that is in a lower area because of the washout to ensure that pedestrians are not in that vicinity.
The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Through you to Jane. Jane, pardon me. Across the province of Ontario, do you know of other operations to do with harbors that are actually privatized? And I know we've discussed this at council a few times in the past. We're at a $3,000 profit, $3,500 next year. Who knows? Maybe we'll be in a deficit position. and privatization's a nasty word with some people, but are there harbors across the province of Ontario that you know of that are privately operated versus municipally operated? Would you know percentages? Do you know of some that are private?
Yeah, there are definitely private harbors in Ontario alone. Probably our closest one, I would say, is Wyerton. Is certainly a private operation. If I may make a couple of points to this particular budget, though, just for council's sake, out of this amount is $100,000 are in debenture and reserve payments, something probably 10 years ago we wouldn't have experienced in the harbour budget. We pay about, I think it's about $70,000 or $80,000 to DFO as for our lease agreement with them. And the other thing is, I can tell you this budget is very similar to other municipally run harbour budgets. We heard that from our consultant when he presented to council. I think that was a year and a half ago. The other thing is we had a terrible spring. Terrible springs don't impact our tourist camps, but they do impact our harbours. And our harbour master has confirmed with me through his conversations along the shoreline, everyone was impacted. That's why you will see, if you look at our actuals from last year, we had a stellar year last year. This year, we had some challenges, and it was because of the very limited summer we had. Not only did we have a late spring, but we had a very early fall as well. Immediately after Labor Day weekend, we were into fall. So weather plays a huge impact on the numbers that it's a crapshoot, I'll say, and sometimes with us developing numbers for a budget to present to you.
Do you know what the vacancy rate is for the for seasonal slips, Jane?
For seasonal slips, it's a difficult question to answer because, to be honest, it's all over the place. We look at it by docks because not every dock has full services. So our docks that have very minimal services, minimal I mean no water, no hydro, they're low. We're sitting at 71.5% right now. Last year we were at 75.7%. Our H dock is at 100%. H dock is along the wall, it's packed. There's a lineup waiting to get on that. But I can tell you when we start to look at F dock, which has minimal services on it, the docks are sinking, they're in rough repair, and I think last year during capital, I did share with you that at some point we're going to have to replace those docks. We're sitting at 46% capacity. Really the only things we put on those docks are jet skis.
Right. The trends with boating, up, down? What are you hearing? What are you seeing?
Actually, we're seeing some increases with boating, more and more, and I don't have all of those results with me, but I'd be happy to share those with you. We are, even this week, and I should have shared it with council, we continue to get positive emails from our users. They're having a great experience at the harbour. We certainly have seen, if you want to talk about trends as far as our harbour, we're certainly seeing some increased numbers because we certainly did take a dip about 8-9 years ago. We're starting to see those rebound back.
Okay, thanks, Jane.
Further comments about the harbour? Councillor Carr.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question follow-up on that one, Jane. So what I'm hearing is you're just saying it's the shape of the docks that is what you guys are alluding to for why we're not filling them. Just I bring this up because I hear different reasoning when I hear from the boating community and stuff like that, and I hear a lot more of it has to do with the cost of what we're charging with them. Can you respond to that, or what are the feelings you're getting back from the boaters that are using non-service docks?
Well, and you'll see we really held our pace with a 2.5% increase, except for 20, 24, and 28-foot docks, where we put that at 0%. We put that at 0% is because the condition of those docks and there's no services to them. So we keep par with a 2.5% increase. You know, as I said before, our harbour master has regular conversations with other marinas, even on the island as well. I guess it's who you talk to. We're hearing different stories, but our harbour master has a detailed report. I'd be happy to share it with you as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to see some of the information back on that, just because some of the discrepancies I'm hearing is maybe what the cost of our docks are going out in comparison to the services that they're receiving at other marinas, you know, in a relatively close vicinity to us.
The high water levels have also impacted our expenses this year, which will also drive up the cost of the docks, unfortunately. It is a business enterprise, I'll say, for lack of a better word, at the harbour, so the tax levy does not pay for those repairments. We've seen quite a bit of, because you can't predict high water levels, it's kind of a knee-jerk process for when there's the water is impacting something such as HDOC electrical. We were in a position where we had to immediately raise the electrical to get it out of the water. Those added expenses are borne back on the users of the harbor. They may not see those immediate impacts, and their impact or their impression is, what do the docks look like as well? B&C, sorry, not sure what dock you're on, but B&C we replaced a number of years ago. Positive comments. It's a secure dock. There's an area for a social aspect of it. We'd like to be able to eventually do the same on the north side too.
Thank you.
And we do have a detailed plan, which, as you alluded to earlier, about laying out how, or the various areas where we could improve things at the harbor to attempt to turn the operation more profitable. And I guess the question maybe that I would ask is, how are we progressing with regard to that overall toward the goal of achieving some of those things that were recommended in that plan? Do we have an overall picture of that?
Yeah, certainly our goal is to replace the north side docks. That's really priority. We've done a tremendous amount as far as electrical repairs. South end docks were redone a number of years ago. We've had positive comments about that. The entire fuel dock was done as well 2 years ago, which is not only safer for our staff but also patrons within that area. Our harbor, which is maybe somewhat unlike other harbors, it's an active area for users of the beach. People like to go get the ice cream cone, take a look at the boats, walk the docks, watch the sunset, and it all tends to be in that vicinity as well. Mark continues to have social events at the waterfront. The dinghy race is a popular event, but it brings a lot of spectators as well. So we're typically constantly cognizant of providing a safe area too, and the new service dock is a much better opportunity for that.
Okay. Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is about, I remember a number of years ago we had the big cement boat, and it took us a long time to get the cement boat moved off the dock, and it was an eyesore, and it was, so the cement boat's gone, thank goodness. But now we have it did sink, I think. Now we have a fishing tug that's been tied and hasn't moved for a number of years. The ropes are starting to rot into the side, and it's, quite frankly, a pretty ugly looking scow. I'm not going to ask if we're collecting revenue off of that, because I pretty much know the answer to that, but is there anything we can do to move that one along as well? Because it's otherwise a lovely looking harbor, except for that rotting hull.
Yeah. Our harbor master has been very diligent in keeping an eye on that boat. So when there are issues such as leakage, there has been some communication with the boat owner. I haven't had a conversation with our harbor master recently in regards to that. There is somewhat minimal impact that we can do in order to move that vessel.
Do you have a comment, Bill?
Yeah, just to give a recent update. As recently as yesterday, the owner of that vessel is working as hard as they can to get it to run and to move. I got an update yesterday, and it may just be moving to Southampton, but it might be moving off of that wall, and they assure us they're working towards that.
Okay, thanks for that update. Anything, Councillor Schreider?
Sorry, just one more question. When I'm looking at, I think I was kind of thinking along the same lines as Mike when we were looking at the difference in revenues. But how come we didn't pay Small Craft Harbor's payment in 2018? Because that's about 80 grand that makes up a little bit of a difference in the budget. Because we've been paying the reserve, the transfer to reserve for 2 different sets of dock upgrades. So the only difference really in the budget is our payment to Small Craft Harbors. So why wouldn't we have done that in 18?
I apologize, that's showing incorrectly in the sheet. We did make that payment, and it was part of our 2018 financials. So it's just an error in the printed version.
So our bottom line, though, in 18 was revenue of $97,000, including the
payment?
No, so because of that error, I would say that the correct figure for 2018 would be closer to 16,000.
16?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I think it's safe to say that the harbor as a profit center has been on the decline for a lot of years, and so it's something we need to keep an eye on, because we certainly don't want the taxpayer to be financing this operation. So, but I think that's been well discussed here, and hopefully we can keep working toward the improvements that have been recommended to us. So that moves us then on to the waterfront. Questions or comments with regard to the Waterfront Service Center? I don't see any. Nope, Councillor Schreider.
Very small amount, but vehicle lease, we haven't used it for a couple of years. Do we anticipate that we would lease a vehicle for down there?
No, and ideally that title probably needs to be changed from lease. That's, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but that's our contribution to the fleet reserve.
Yeah, we can definitely transfer that to the fleet reserve, as we've done with other program areas for former lease amounts.
To you, to Jane. Jane, the part-time wage is $42,660. Can you tell me a little bit about the role of those employees? How many employees are there at the waterfront, and what the role they play? Is it freight from Heights Grove to North Southampton, the waterfront staff, or is it just for the Port Elgin Harbor?
No, it's the entire 18 kilometers.
What's the role that, how many students are there in that 42,000?
So I'm going to say 3 or 4, Frank, is that? 5,
so it's 5 waterfront students. What's the role, Frank? What exactly do they do?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. There's a crew of 5 students in the peak, and they're led by a full-time operator. And their primary duties is to follow the maintenance plan as according to what we have written. So everything from garbage pickup to raking the debris, to using the small equipment for removing the debris that washes up, to replacing posts that get washed away in high water. And it also, that includes the waterfront stewardship student. So they basically are, the 5 of them are dedicated to the whole 18 kilometers, and they obviously focus on the high-use recreation areas more than the more rural areas.
Thanks, Frank. I just want to clarify it's north to south, and so it does include garbage. That's a garbage collection crew along the waterfront too, then.
They assist. There's also a dedicated garbage crew, but they'll do litter sweeps. For example, they do litter sweeps in July and August. They'll do litter sweeps of Gobles, Port Elgin, Maine, and south almost daily, or at least every other day.
It wasn't that long ago, Jane, I guess we didn't have waterfront staff from north to south, right? Was it 5 years ago you implemented that? That you brought that into effect?
Really through supply and demand too. You're correct. We kind of utilize some of our part-time staff to go down and do as a knee-jerk reaction, but now we've got
a dedicated staff.
Yeah.
About 4 or 5 years ago, I think, probably. Good.
Councillor Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jane, is somewhere in here the beach raking contract?
Yeah, that'll be under line
1,000?
5,900. And I'm sorry, no, wrong one. 40. Yeah.
720.
Okay, is that the $31,000? Okay, that's
large portion of that is
the contract. Yeah. Okay.
Further comments? I think it would just be a useful note, not just with regard to this budget, but all of them. We've heard a couple of questions about staffing and staffing levels in these departments. I think probably we should, in future, get a line here showing full-time equivalents in each of these centers, so that council can be clear as to how many staff are working in each of these centers, and what the changes might be. We could track the changes too. It would just be council's clearly interested in knowing those figures, and that could easily be included in these pages in the future. Councilor, or the Vice Deputy Mayor.
With the beach grooming, Jane or Frank, I suppose, high lake levels. That 31,000 is really a safety net in terms of if the water does recede to levels 2 years ago, if it does, then there's lots of beach to groom. But there are certainly sections right now in Saugeen Shores, we all know, Heights Grove in particular, there's just no room to groom any beach down there. And I'm sure there's going to be a whole lot less space to groom at the Port Elgin beach. So that 31,000, we spent that this year. I mean, at the end of, if we leave that number the same, at the end of 2020, that could be significantly lower with beach grooming, because if there's no beach to groom, then we're not going to need that number, correct? But you're leaving it in there just in case the water levels recede.
Yes, you won't. I don't expect to use as much the grooming equipment, but I expect there's going to be a lot of erosion control and high water damage mitigation. So certainly I anticipate a lot of that budget that we'll need to spend on that next year. And we also use that for dozel. We rent a dozer for some of the grooming in south, so that comes out of that budget as well.
It's not, that 31,000 isn't strictly for the groomer.
Correct. The actual groomer is about half that.
Okay.
Yep.
Anything further on the waterfront service area? Another small note is that both references to the Tourist Association ought to change in there, since the Tourist Association no longer exists. All right. That moves then on to the Coliseum. Questions or comments with regard to the Coliseum? Pardon me, Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With the Coliseum, with the new ice surfaces and presumably the new compressor equipment we got new compressors, right? Dehumidification. Are we expecting to see efficiencies gained in electrical consumption?
I would hope so. I don't have a clear answer for you right now. I'll be working with our project manager on that one. Mm-hmm.
Utility costs are, I'm looking at it now, but presumably fairly high. 120 there, yeah. 120. It's the largest item on the bill. Mm-hmm.
As you will typically find in ice plants. The complex, I think, is 190,000.
Right.
Further comments on the Coliseum? I don't see any, so that probably moves us on to the community complex. Questions or comments with regard to the complex service area? The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, Jane, 4860 uniforms. What's that?
Uniforms will be what we purchase for our union staff, our indoor staff, to work in the complex in the Coliseum. So that's pants, jackets, shirts, hats.
Anything further on the the complex? I don't see anything. Tourist camps, questions or comments? Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jane, line 5300, I think, on utilities. Our year-to-date amount is $63,000 approximately. And is that just because we don't have final bills in, or?
Correct.
Because it's significantly lower than the other amounts? The other
yes,
years?
I would be surprised if that 63,000 represents from August.
Okay.
Typically, because they're behind in the billing. Sorry, I didn't take a look to see where we are today.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor, if you could help me understand, I gather from the questions I submitted earlier that the telephone expense includes both the Southampton and Port Elgin tourist camps. However, I'm just curious, what type of telephone services are we procuring for close to $5,000 a year? That's just telephones in the main offices?
Landlines in the main office.
A singular landline at each?
I quickly took a look at that account yesterday, and what's that? Yeah, and it could be for emergency purposes. That's why you have a landline. I'm not really sure, to be quite honest, but it all is contributed to our provider.
I think that's the debit machines too, if I'm not. Oh yeah. So I think it's the whole infrastructure down there where you take in revenue down there.
We are having some troubles. There is a line item that has been, I think, manipulated on this version of the budget with regard to bank charges. So maybe we can leave this as a takeaway to just confirm what those charges are, and if that's in alignment with other facilities that have telephones. Perhaps, like I assume the Plex and the Coliseum also have telephones. It just seems high to me. Perhaps it's not, but if we can look at whether that does include the bank charges or the rentals of those transaction units that we would have down there. I don't expect you'll have an answer now, but if we can maybe take it away.
Sorry, Sue's just confirmed that our debt fees will not be part of that. That's just the line. And
Correct me if I'm wrong, but Dan, the bank charges relate to the cost for mainly the debit machines, and a lot of the transactions typically are through credit card, and those come with significant fees. So
perhaps what Frank is indicating is that you need a dedicated line for the debit machine itself, so you're paying for multiple lines at each facility. Okay.
Quite possibly in the Port Elgin camp, I believe it's got another line out at the back too, so they all contribute.
We can take a closer look for sure.
I think we can clear that up as part of the answers. The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jane, utilities, $118,000. I'm just wondering the rate we charge at the Port Elgin Tourist Camp, well, both camps, I guess, is $2,700, $2,600. I still say a bargain across the province of Ontario, even with the 3% increase. $118,000. I mean, $2,700 heat, hydro, water, sewer included is a good deal. Have staff ever talked about? Because a fair number of campgrounds have hydro as part of metering, where they're charged the surcharge at a tourist camp. And I know it's a complicated issue. Maybe it's a capital discussion in a few weeks. Has staff talked? I know we've talked about this in the past. Have you recently talked about metering all of the sites at the tourist camp?
We've talked about talking about it. No,
I know it's complicated.
It is very complicated, and probably hence the reason why we haven't revisited in the last number of years. With our new project manager in hand now, that's something that we're certainly having some additional conversations. What that means, I don't want to say we're doing it. I want to just say that we are dangling our toes in the water to talk about meters.
Well, that's good to hear, Mr. Mayor, because I think that's something we really do need to take a look at. And I know it's complicated. What's buried underneath the ground there at the tourist camps. There's probably a mishmash of stuff, but it's good you're looking at it.
The Councillor Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A comment and a question. The comment I think was around the utilities in this era of rising utility costs. Isn't part of it because you force people to get rid of those old derelict fridges off of their decks around the tourist camps?
We have additional surcharges for additional refrigerators that we charge for once many campers like to have a larger fridge in their attic room, so staff annually goes through and does an inventory, and we charge based on that inventory.
Okay, good. And then the question is legal fees. Do we need legal fees at the campground? $500 to get you about an hour and a half of legal fee, right?
We put it in as a placeholder. We have had to access that in the past. We sometimes need to remind the campers that it is not a 12-month residence. So in cases such as that, we do access legal advice. So we have left it in there for, you are right, we have not had to use it for the last couple of years. But
The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just to come back, second page, 6100, the bank charges, the 30,000, that is for us using the debit machine? Is that correct? Are those charges not transferred back to the user who's using it? We're paying for that?
they will be transferred through their fees, through their seasonal fee payment. So yes, you are right, but we still need to show the cost of doing that We're billed that, and in turn, that's billed back to them.
It's just an in and an out.
Yeah.
Any further comments on tourist camps? Do we? What do you know at this point, Jane? What the waiting list is to get into our tourist camps?
Longer than my arm. We always have a waiting list to get in, and some of those individuals on that wait list merely want to have a different spot in the camp too, so they're on that list as well. But it is a very sought after camp, both of them. Prime location, access to the waterfront. So I couldn't give you an exact number, to be fair. I haven't looked at it in the last year or two. So,
the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, Jane, so Port Elgin wait list too then? I know Southampton's had traditionally long.
Oh, Port Elgin as well.
Wait list as well?
Yeah, wait list for both.
So we could maybe use another 20-some sites someday there.
Don't get ahead of us, Mike. All right. So, if there's nothing further on the tourist camps, then one last one in community services. 8.12, the pool. Questions or comments with regard to the pool?
If I may add a comment to this one as well.
Yeah.
This budget also has a service request sheet at the back, and it is in referencing part-time wages. Historically, what we've experienced is that our part-time wages have increased through the economic adjustment, but they haven't increased based on the usage of the pool. And as our numbers increase, our part-time, we rely on more part-time staff, and their hours are increasing as well. So we hope that this references closer to the actuals that we've experienced over the last number of years.
Okay. Comments or questions to the pool service area? I don't see. Hey, Deputy Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, through you to Jane, and probably Mike can answer this one, our hot water problem from last week. The school board, that's their issue, and they got it taken care of? Thank you. I know the kids were very, it took them a long time to warm up in school that week with the water being down.
Yep. Toughens you up. Anything else? If there's nothing further, then that brings us to the end of the community services. So we'll break for lunch, and we try to reconvene not long after 1 o'clock.